What's really good, everybody? This is Nathan Allebach, and welcome to the podcast where we get into people's stories and go down a bunch of rabbit holes about what's really good in the world. This episode, I think, might be the deepest rabbit hole we've gone down so far. I had my great-uncle Scott Leatherman on the show, also known as Gus or Dutchie, or I'm sure a handful of other names that I'm completely unaware of to some people. He is a world traveler, history aficionado, specifically on the Civil War era, a world-class tennis instructor and practitioner, and I'd go as far to say as he's one of the best storytellers I've ever personally known. Growing up, my family would see him maybe once a year for reunion type stuff, and he'd always have the whole room laughing and listening to his eccentric tales and political style rants. I remember being like 11 or 12 maybe, driving to Queens in New York with my dad to clean out his apartment, and it looked like something out of a movie. I mean, books and newspapers and antiques and just stuff everywhere. And a few years ago, I wound up cleaning out his storage unit with most of that stuff in it, which was a total trip. I mean, he had, I'd say, somewhere around like 1,000 books on the Civil War, maybe 500 or so on tennis, then hundreds more on random stuff from his travels, with bookmarks in all of them and scribbled notes and just random stuff all over the place. You know, now that I'm saying this out loud, it kind of makes him sound like a mad scientist or a hoarder or something. I mean, maybe he's a little bit of both. I don't know. I guess you can decide. So anyway, a few months ago when I was getting married, he flew up to the Philly area to attend from his current home in Mississippi. And one night while he was here, we popped into the studio, he had some drinks, and we hit record. Now, anyone who knows Scott knows he's like a wind-up toy, and once you get him going on something, he just goes and goes. So this is more or less like a 3-hour story that covers a bit of his childhood growing up, how he got into tennis, his world travels, some history sprinkled in, and this super bizarre urban legend-like tale that my family has heard a bunch of times in bits and pieces, but we really got into it here from when Scott lived in Fiji and had this suspenseful run-in with some locals. This is the last episode on my backlog, and it's definitely a special one. I think we went to about midnight with this thing. I mean, I was exhausted by the end of it, so you know it's good. Anyway, I hope you all enjoy listening to my great Uncle Scott as much as I did, and please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or wherever else with guest suggestions or feedback going into 2019. It's been a huge honor sharing this small platform with all of you who listen, where I get to hash out different beliefs and opinions and stories with people I find interesting, and I really appreciate all of you for being part of the show. Now let's get into what's really good. Uncle Scott, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, Nathan, my pleasure. Came from the deep south, you can tell by my voice right now. Deep south of Mississippi.
Absolutely.
Came to visit.
Your new home, your latest home.
My latest home in Mississippi,
One
yes. I've been deeper south than that, yes.
True.
Worldwide, I've been much deeper south than that.
Uncle Scott, you have one of the craziest lives of anyone that I know.
No, you get out a little bit more.
Okay.
You're fine.
I don't even know where to start. So, I mean, let's just start. I mean, for those people who may not know anything about you, let's maybe go through some of your childhood, what it was like growing up for you, what were your interests?
Well,
where do you want to start?
I had a very normal Dutch upbringing. I was just a little Dutch man in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And my parents are all Pennsylvania Dutchmen. They were the first ones to speak English as their primary language. So this would have been early 1900s, it turns out. They were all primary German speakers up till that time. And it turns out the family had been here, mom's side since 1699 and dad's side since 1721. So it goes back in the Dutch land pretty far. But, just raised in a very post-war middle class
Right.
background. We had pretensions to be upper middle class. We had a very big house that Dad had got from, I think, war profiteering, but we won't go into that. That's another story. And after the war, they had cash, and they bought a big house and fixed it up to modern standards, 3.5 acres in the middle of a little town called Percy in Bucks County. And we had a very idyllic upbringing, a lot of time to run around and do my own thing. Unfortunately, by the time I came around, the last of 5, the money had sort of flown. The business that my dad
So
had
what happened? What happened?
Well, the dad was a hosiery man. He'd been, I think he trained in hosiery mills when he was young. And he and an uncle of mine, so his brother-in-law, were both trained the sort of same way in hosiery. And that was a big thriving business once, available wealth came back in a later depression. And from what I understand, they got a loan from my grandfather, who I never met because he was dead by the time I was around, a farmer who, in the Dutch style, would hide the money in the mattress, and there was plenty of cash and didn't trust the banks. Thank God, because there was a depression, don't you know? And he gave them a loan. My uncle, his son, and my father, his son-in-law, got a loan to start a little hosiery business. Now, my dad was the mechanical side. He knew the machinery, and my uncle was the business side. So I had a little business in Percy, Pennsylvania, and they ended up doing well, sort of because of the war.
Yeah. So what year was this, or what decade?
Well, they started in the 30s. They started in the 30s
Okay.
with their business. I'm not exactly sure when. I wasn't around then. Mm-hmm. I'm old, but not that old. The 30s, they started small, and it turns out the Japanese were getting frisky in Asia. You might have heard about that. Mm-hmm. Before they dropped bombs on us, they were awful frisky over there. And the trade in silk became interrupted. Now, hosiery, as you young people may not realize, hosiery is referring to stockings mostly. And stockings were made of silk. And they had machinery to make this silk into these lovely stockings, had a seam in the back. And if you've seen old black and white movies, you might see the girls leaning back very provocatively, looking over their shoulder and straightening their seams. Right. Very sexy. But of great annoyance to the women. So I hear. Still. That's the way stockings were made. They had to have a seam, had to join everything up. So Dad and Uncle Walter, they had a hosiery mill, small business. They did business with people in Philadelphia and made the stockings. They didn't have their own brand, sent them off and branded as God knows what. And they did all right, but as the silk trade dried up, they were going to be in trouble. There's a new business. They got bills to pay. There's no silk. What the hell? These Japanese, what are they doing up there? They ended up as a fairly new thing called rayon. Rayon was an artificial fiber, and it had some attributes of silk. It didn't really work that well in the machines. It didn't make a great product, but it was a product, and it was cheaper, and you could get it. If the silk was easily broken, and there's not much you could do when you had to run your silk stocking. The rayons would break a little less, and it wasn't as attractive. It didn't cling as good or whatnot, but they did rayon stockings for a while until the war came, and those pesky Japanese dropped bombs on the Pearl Harbor in Hawaii in 1941. Boom, everything went to hell. Well, now, rayon, off to the war effort. Silk, gone. Japanese weren't letting any silk out. Now they were in deep doo-doo. But thank God for corporate America, because the boys down in Delaware, DuPont, had invented a brand new formulae that was nylon. And nylon was new about 1940. And turns out nylon could do everything silk did, didn't break as well, didn't break as often, and it was very solid. And worked much better in the machines than rayon. Nylon was a miracle fabric. Unfortunately, since the war had started, all the nylon that DuPont could make was diverted to the war effort.
Right.
So we don't know much about this, but the national government at that time was not very Republican, shall we say. And when things had to be done, the government put money into it. Now, the government put capital in a big business like DuPont so they could build more factories and make as much nylon as possible.
For the war effort.
Yeah, these are parachutes. These are this, these are that, all sorts of things. So DuPont expanded expanded exponentially in a very short time, making a lot of nylon. And it turned out by 1943, as my father and uncle were like limping through with rayon, but women need stockings, and stockings shall be made.
Right.
Even if they're not good stockings, there is some profit in it. As they were limping along with rayon and barely making their bills, nylon became so prevalent that the government said, "Ha! Now, DuPont, we've helped you build your factories. You've made so much nylon. We got everything we need. You must supply nylon for the little people out there. Whatever their monthly allotment, yearly allotment was before the war, that's what they shall have now." So Dad and Uncle Walter all of a sudden had as much nylon, really, as they could, because they didn't have a lot of labor. They only had a limited amount of machines. But they could get all the nylon they had before the war. Maybe they had more labor before the war. They would sell some back to DuPont. They would sell some to other companies who had more production. They made cash money.
So that's where that
taxable.
money came from.
It was a little bit of extra on the side. Plus, nylons were gold. All right? Every woman needed nylons, and silk was breaking. What are they going to do?
Yeah.
Cash money. You could pay your milkman in nylons. You could pay your breadman in nylons. You could pay the butcher in nylons. You could probably pay the taxman in nylons. You had something that everyone wanted for their girls.
Okay.
And so they, could barter and whatnot and not pay maybe we say, tax avoidance, shall we say? I'm sure there was some of that during the war, and they might have been participant. I am speculating on this. All you lawyers out there, I have no first-hand evidence. I'm speculating on where the frickin' money came from to buy a very large 3-story farmhouse in the middle of town that had 3 acres of land and rehabilitated up to modern standards in 1947 when there had been a war on and you were making nylons the whole time. They were too old to be drafted, by the way, born in early 1900. So 1947, big house bought, lots of land. He's looking like gentry here with the factories have gone from one small factory into to another small factory and one a little bit larger. And they owned those outright. So they were making nylons to beat the band. Now, early 1950s, post-war boom, money everywhere, money to be made. Certainly women love their nylons still, like they always did. Going out to dancing, need their nylons, money flowing. The big companies, with nylon, you could do things non-traditionally. You could do things differently. In fact, you could make nylon stockings without a seam in them because nylon was not silk. Unfortunately, my father and my uncle being older, and my mother and my auntie also being older, were not aware of the fact that perhaps the modern-day girls did not want to bend over provocatively over their shoulder and straighten that crooked line down the back of their leg. Perhaps they would just like to apply the nylons and let them be for the rest of the evening. So my father, when all the big companies were dumping these brand-new machines, but they were seamed stocking machines. While they were dumping them, my uncle and my father were busily buying them up at 10 cents on the dollar and placing them in
they
their
put all
new
their investments
factories.
into them.
Yes, they did.
Any relevant technology.
Because certainly this is only a fad, and that the women will come to their senses and will buy seamed stockings.
Again.
Exactly. Now, I'm sure you people out there and my nephew here can find parallels to such thinking nowadays, but it's not for me to make such things. Me looking from farther away say, how can you be that stupid? But not being a woman with nylons and not knowing the trade, I'm sure that's very easy for me to say. Though they did go bankrupt very shortly.
Yeah, so that's what happened.
That's what happens when you overinvest in an older technology, shall we say. Right. And I was born right around that time. So as the money was fastly leaving the family business, and my father went from business owner, since he knew mechanics, into the trades of fixing other people's machines or making other people's machines going, I was born the lucky boy. I was born in a family with a big house and 3 acres of land. And Actually, my mother going back to work. I was a latchkey child. And as my father working night shift because he was older and couldn't get the day shift job.
Yeah, because you're the youngest of, you said 5.
5.
And like, what's
closest is 9 years.
I was going to say, so like, what's the distance between you and the oldest?
Surprise, baby. And between me and the oldest is about 21 years.
Wow.
I have a nephew who's 21 who was born my year.
That is...
I'm 5 months older than my oldest nephew.
That's crazy.
And my oldest sister was not a teenage bride. She was pregnant in 21. She popped out that puppy at her near her 21st birthday. So, yes, I was at the end of the line, as it were.
So was it rough for you growing up? What was it like? Like, what were your interests?
I didn't know nothing. I didn't know
This is
shit.
all you knew.
I had the biggest house that everyone I knew.
Yeah, right.
I had friends who were doctors. Friends' parents were doctors.
Yeah, right.
They didn't have 3 acres of land and a big old house. I did not know better. Did not.
So the house, but no money.
Me.
That was the family.
That was it. And the house wasn't paid for, but it was pretty much paid for. So I'm sure the mortgage was very small. And I did notice in the early 60s, when I was about 8 or so, that half the land was sold off to make a house for someone else.
Yeah.
Yes, so there was a house being built on half of our land, which just happened to have the tennis court on it. God damn it.
So it got you into tennis? I was going to ask. Like,
no, the tennis, no one played tennis, brother. They were too old. I was brought up with a tennis court in my front yard. And I didn't play tennis yet. By the time I was interested in tennis, they had sold it. Tennis court was a parking lot, I'll have you know.
Oh, jeez. It at least created some kind of neural connection, maybe.
Yes, I did
Planted a seed.
I did see my 13-year-old brother play a tournament and finals, and so I knew I had some tennis in the family. But I was not playing. I was playing baseball like everyone else and playing pickup football with the boys, and getting muddy and stuff like that. So I did all sorts of sports. But by the time I got to be 12 or something, I was tired of those adults telling me what to do.
Oh, little rebel Scotty.
Yeah, I was 12. I played my baseball, and I wasn't that good. I played every spot in the field except pitcher. I played first base, second base, shortstop, third base, every outfield, and I even caught for a day. Didn't like it very much. Too much bending.
Wasn't for you.
Wasn't for me. Nah.
So at what age did you start to spark interest and identity and figure out was it late teens?
The individual tennis thing got me interested when I was done with that organized.
Okay.
We didn't have organized football. We didn't have soccer. All we had was baseball.
Yeah, America's pastime.
Yeah, I was okay at baseball. I was not, obviously, didn't burn up the barn because I played every goddamn position, but I wasn't terrible because I played every position. So I could throw, I could catch, I could move. I was good enough, but I didn't have any spark for the game.
Right.
Now, my brother, 13 years older, he played football and basketball, but his third sport was tennis in high school, which is odd because tennis, again, we had a court. It wasn't that odd in specifics, but in general, link football, basketball, you're going to think baseball.
Yeah.
No,
exactly.
It was football, basketball, tennis. So maybe as 11 or 12-year-old, when I was done with Little League, I thought, well, if he could play tennis, then I can too. Wow, how hard can it be?
So when was it? When did you get into it?
I was, he was finishing college about when I got interested. So, I was about 10. 9 or 10, and my brother would take me out for a lesson every so often. He back from school, or he worked at a summer camp. Your granddad was director of a summer camp.
Okay.
Up in Massachusetts, and my brother got a job up there doing what? Teaching tennis. And I was his guinea pig on learning. We had books back then. There was nothing on TV
of course, no
about
YouTube.
Tennis. Yeah. No YouTubes. There was no pipes connecting us with information. No, None of that. So they had books, and he learned something, and he read. He had a tennis magazine. There was one out, and he had a collection of those. So he knew something about tennis, but teaching was sort of new. I was his guinea pig. That's probably why I got interested in tennis. I could learn from my brother.
Right.
Spend time with my brother.
Was he did you look up to him?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. He was God. I used to watch football games. In fact, when he was in college, again, he's 13 years older, so I was... when he was in college, when he started college, I was 5. So when he was playing junior, senior, I was 7, 8, whatever. And used to go to all the games. my dad would pay me 50 cents, which was top dollar back then. I'll tell you, kids, 50 cents was something. To pay me 50 cents not to go to the away games.
Why? Just
because I was a pain in the ass. I was a rookie son of a bitch. I'd be driving up to Long Island or something, rooching around for 3 hours. Dad said, "Oh no, I'll give you money not to go." I said yes, okay, that'll be fine.
You can.
I've seen him play football before. Yes, I was even back then mercenary, so it could be had for 50 cents back then. But kids, hey. Take this for granted. 50 cents was at least $5,
right?
And today's money, yes, at least maybe 10 for what you could buy. So a gallon of gas was 29 cents. You figure it out. So I didn't have to worry about gas then, but still, you get the idea. Penny candy,
right?
Two for a penny. Lots of that, 50 cents. So I could be bought off. But yes, he was my idol. I only had sisters, so he's the only brother. Me being a guinea pig probably spiked my interest because he was not a bad teacher. He was all right. And so I taught him a little something. He taught me a lot of something. And I took it from there.
So you kept on tennis like that was like the
And it was individual start. Where all this other sport that I'd done, all the sport I did was individual because the kids would organize it themselves.
Right.
Except for baseball, which is organized by the adults. Yep. I had adult coaches and all that. So it was different. Individual sport. I was about that age, maybe where you start to get slightly individualized.
Yeah, developing your ego. All
10,
that.
11. Yeah, so, this is not so bad. There's nothing else like this. There was no golf back then. Nothing on the TV. Well, they'd have TV, a little bit of golf. It was so boring. Golf is boring. And especially in black and white children. Yeah. Black and white, very boring.
Yeah.
So, tennis was it for me. And we had a little closet in our kitchen. I never told you about this. In our kitchen, it was a very big old kitchen. And it had 3 closet doors. One closet door seemed to have a lot of shoes in it that I remember. Shoes and coats that probably people only wore a few times a year. And the middle closet had... I don't know, they had stuff. I don't know what. I can't remember what. The third closet door, the clear closet door, was a sports store. You'd open that up. And I'm telling you now, there was everything in that door, from a 30-06 rifle to tennis ball cans littering the floor, and old tennis rackets.
A treasure closet.
Yeah, some of them with strings. Archery, there was, I remember there was a bow, and there were some arrows in there. Open for anyone to visit.
Of course, just open the door.
Yes,
good. No
take
locks.
These arrows out. If I wanted to assassinate my friend, I could have done it with...
Normal Friday afternoon.
Normal Friday. I'm going to take that out, son of a bitch, piss me off. Thing. So there's all sorts of things. Don't do this today, children. Do not do this today. They'll put you in jail.
Different world.
Yes, different world. So I had access to tennis racket. Maybe it wasn't the right size for me, and tennis balls that were old and didn't bounce too good. But it was good. I was only 10 or 11. Yes, I always had to go out and do something with it. And I was motivated then. So I'd play tennis. My youngest sister played tennis. I remember seeing her play tennis in high school. And I remember the use of the tennis court a few times. It was used before it got sold. My youngest sister is 9 years older. She played with her friends. There was a friend of hers in the neighborhood who played. And that friend's younger brother, who was older than me, they would play. So I saw that court actually used as a tennis court, so I sort of knew what tennis looked like. I just wasn't old enough to do it. Children did not play tennis back then.
Right.
We had to be a teenager.
Did you know what you wanted to do? Like, what did you think you wanted to do at that age?
Hit ball.
You just wanted to play
See
sports.
ball, hit ball. Make ball go over net. That is very important. Make ball. I didn't know it at the time, but I wanted to see ball, hit ball. That was...
So what did you want to go to school for when you got a little older? Like, what did you want to do as a career? Did you have any aspirations? Or... No? No, I
had no idea. I liked a lot of different things.
Yeah, a lot of interests.
I had good teachers, so it just naturally came to me that I'll be a teacher. I like this teaching. I like these teachers. I've had some good teachers, had some bad teachers. But I thought, teaching's all right. That's what I thought. So never entered my mind I could teach tennis. There was no tennis boom yet.
Right.
Until I got into high school.
Like culture-wide, at least.
There was no awareness. Tennis was still an effete Bill Tilden sport.
Right.
He was gay,
Yes.
Though we didn't use that word back then. Little boy diddle little boys. So that was known. Anyhow, it was a very different sport. It was not a cultural...
How was it looked at in the broader culture?
It was very odd that my brother played macho sport like football. He's fullback.
Yeah.
Undersized fullback, 5'10", probably 160 pounds, soaking
wow.
wet. And he played basketball and then tennis. That was looked on as, I'm sure it was looked on as different.
Yeah.
But he was obviously an athlete. He couldn't have done all those things. He, from what I understand, took up tennis for the only good reason there is to take up tennis.
The ladies?
He had a girlfriend, yes. His girlfriend had a family that still had money, unlike ours. And she was able to take lessons from an actual tennis professional.
She was getting good.
And she was a very benevolent young lady. I remember her name was Gogo. I liked her myself. She was very nice. And Gogo would come, and whatever she learned, she'd take Jerry out in the court, and she'd try to show him what she'd learned. And he was athletic enough. He could take it up or discern enough of what she learned to use it. And that eventually trickled down to me. Now, see, here's where trickle-down works, children. Economics, it does not. It does not work. Trickle down. I'm telling you what trickles down, people. May I say it? It's piss and shite that trickles down. It is, but also knowledge trickles down. Knowledge does trickle down. Yeah. So I had a trickle down tennis education, but don't use that in economics, kids. It's not right. Trickle down. I think we've already found that out, but we're going to try it again just to be sure. Anyway, I did take up the tennis, and maybe Gogo, his girlfriend, was a part of the reason too. I said,
that's so interesting.
There's some hot chicks who play this game of tennis. There aren't any other sports that I know of.
Was it primarily female sport that time?
Where the girls and guys can play tennis together. This is mixed doubles thing. This is revolutionary.
Yeah.
I had never thought of that before. But, yeah, I mean, I'd seen my sister play in a mixed game. I don't think I'd ever seen my brother play mixed doubles. But, I knew their concept. Yeah. And I'd seen my sister play tennis matches. And so I knew girls played it.
Was that widespread? Like, what was it like between guys and girls? Like, was it seen as more of a girls' sport? Like, were guys and girls permitted to play together regularly?
It was maybe... It wasn't looked on as being as athletic, and certainly was no contact.
Right, it wasn't, yeah.
So it was looked on being less than manly, perhaps, because there's no contact, except with your racket and the ball, which can be taken badly, too. So the tennis in the day was looked on as, oh, that's an interesting sport. Let's talk about Penn State, what they're doing. So it was off the radar. And again, there weren't that many individual sports. Now, the tennis... Lucky for me, and this is the only reason that I took up a business as a tennis person, was that as I progressed through high school, it just so happened that tennis went from a totally amateur sport into an open sport.
Oh, wow. So, like, perfect timing.
Yes. And I was aware enough of things through my brother's tennis magazines of how the amateur sport worked. And then all of a sudden, and then the professionals, people who took cash money, surprise, they were totally, they're like shunned, like Dutchmen. Huh. You're shunning. The professionals weren't allowed to traipse the grounds, the hallowed grounds of the amateur sports.
Okay.
Anyone who turned professional and took money for paying, a contract for paying, was tossed out. They talk about the Grand Slams in tennis. Well, the Grand Slams till 1968 were entirely amateur. The only money you got was, 10 pounds a day, which in that day was maybe 10 pounds, $28 a day.
Okay.
You could take as expenses. That was reasonable money. I mean, you certainly got your hotel and some food, since they were probably giving you food at the tournament anyhow. You could do all right on $28, but you were going to make your way around the world on $28 a day. Yeah. All right. So the boys took a little under the appearance money under the table, or they sold their extra racket strings, or they did this or that, hustled, made a little extra money. turned a blind eye to that. The amateurs were allowed to do that as long as it wasn't up front.
Right.
It was down there low under the table. But when you took your money up front and said, I'm playing for money, I won Wimbledon, God damn it, and now I'm going to turn pro, you got a guarantee. One person a year, maybe one, got a guarantee. $100,000 a year was a poop load of money back then.
Oh, yeah.
But you had to play your guts out for that. From one town to the other to another. It was called barnstorming. And just like the old biplane, they would barnstorm around
going
one
everywhere.
place on a station wagon. Yeah, station wagon with everything in the back. They brought their own court, their rackets and balls. So it was a hard work, and there weren't many people who could do it. In 1968, things have been progressing a little bit. And mind you, let's talk context here. Golf had been open since the 1930s, early 30s. Not tennis. We're talking 1968.
Yeah.
1968 happened to coincide, children, with me being in high school. So as things started to hot up a little bit, there was an American called Lamar Hunt, and those of you who know something about sport history, Lamar Hunt was an oil millionaire from Texas who had bought a pro franchise called the Kansas City Chiefs and turned them into champions of the American Football League. So Lamar Hunt had a lot of money, had interest in sports, was a second generation money guy, so didn't have to fool with the business so much. This is where his money went. So made the Kansas City Chiefs as one of the top teams back in the 60s. I'm talking, children. They were very good. And that also helped force the American Football League and the National Football League to join to make what we know now as the NFL.
Interesting.
It wasn't that way. Now, Lamar Hunt, conquering that area of interest, decided this here tennis is an individual sport. This is something I want to get involved in. Now he's from Texas, remember. I want to get involved in this here tennis.
So it's an accurate accent.
Oh, yeah. I'm from Texas, and I talk funny. So he took his money. Now he's still involved. But tennis is a little bit of money. He bought, I think, 8 amateurs right out from the game. And these are amateurs from ex-Wimbledon champion.
Like the best of the best.
Some of the best, but not just the best. Guys who had personality, guys who had a variance in nationality. He bought a few Australians because they were the best, a few Americans because they were the second best. He bought out like a South African guy, a New Zealander, a Frenchman, I think. He had a little bit of an Englishman. He had it covered, like the Grand Slam tournaments, the 4 big tournaments in tennis: Australia, France, England, and America. So we had a representative on his team of 8, at least one from each of those countries. And these guys were good, but they weren't all the top, the best, like in the old days.
Okay.
Oh, he just skimmed off some of the best. And at the same time, there was another group who saw the advantage of it, and I think it was independent thinking, great ideas.
Right.
Spring from many places at once.
So
Another group, American money too, bought up another 8 players also. So now there were 16 of the best players in the world from all over, not just America, not just Australia, all over, that were sucked out of the amateur. And now Wimbledon's looking and say, we are the world's championship here at Wimbledon. We cannot deign to hold a tournament without the best players. We're going to have an open tournament in 1968. Fuck the rest of you. The tennis, the head exploded in the tennis world. But it made sense.
Yeah.
I mean, Wimbledon was the biggest tournament, as it is now. US Open is right there, but biggest tournament, prestige. They said, no, this ain't right. All right. It's been right for the last 100 years, but it ain't right now. This is not good. We have the best tournament. We must have the best players. So they said, 1968, open tournament. Without consulting, per se, anyone else. They said, we're on. So everyone else is scrambling. Oh, crap, the British have done it now. But they know that they're most conservative, so if they see the reason to it, they can cop to it and say, well, the British did it first. It wasn't our idea.
Right.
It's a British idea. If it goes south, the British did it. If it goes good, it's like, wasn't that a brilliant idea we had with the British? Wasn't it brilliant? So, 68, French Open. French went open. That was the first tournament of the year back then. And then Wimbledon was open. Both great successes, best players, amateurs and professionals, mixed. I think the final was French Open was two of the brand new professionals. Wimbledon, two of the brand new professionals were finals. They battled each other for the money.
Yeah.
Wasn't a lot, but they battled each other more than they're used to having. At the U.S. Open, 1968, the wheels come off. 1968, the U.S. Open, an amateur got to the final against a professional. The amateurs happened to be a black dude from Virginia, Arthur Ashe, got to the finals of the first U.S. Open. That's why he has a stadium named after him.
Wow.
Got to the finals. He had won the U.S. Amateur Championship in singles and doubles that year. They still had to have an amateur championship.
Yeah.
And he came into there at the U.S. Open as not near a top seed because he's so amateur.
Yeah.
Fucking blasted his way through the tournament into the final against a Dutchman who'd somehow beaten Australians, or the Australians had beaten each other. This Dutchman was one of the professionals, Tom Hocker from Holland, in the finals against Arthur Ashe. Arthur Ashe was a serve and volley guy, his grass courts. He went through this Dutchman like a hot knife through butter.
No way.
Yes, he
That's
stoned
amazing.
him. I mean, when you're talking tennis, you're talking individual sport. Talking, you're on a roll.
Right.
Well, this guy had won some big tournaments on grass this summer, and then rolls into the U.S. Open and got a big ass chip on his shoulder.
Right.
Not only is he an amateur, he black.
Yep.
He the only black man in the whole.
And so it's
goddamn
1968,
tournament.
right?
There's 128 people in the
Yeah.
tournament. He the black man. He's it. That's it. That's just him right there. No black women. There's one black man.
It was 1968.
1968.
Wow.
And you know what else has happened in America in 1968, 66, 67, 68? There's a lot of upheaval.
Yep. So was this national news? Was this a big
Big news. And not only was he black, he had graduated from college. He was UCLA, if I remember right. Won the NCAAs. Educated, well-spoken fellow. And a lieutenant in the U.S. Army, I'll have you
Wow.
know, because we had the draft back then. So he's Lieutenant Arthur Ashe that won the U.S. Open. Could he take money? No, he was an amateur. He got his $28 a day. Maybe, I'm not even sure he got that because he was on extended duty from the U.S. Army. So I'm not even sure what he got paid. He might have only got his Army pay. You know who got the $10,000 prize money?
The guy that lost?
Yes, Tommy
No
Ocker.
way.
$10,000 in his
What?
freaking pocket. Maybe that's why he lost. It didn't matter. Goddamn, whether he won or
Jeez.
not. He knew that shit.
So this guy's got a stadium named after him.
Yeah,
though, so
Arthur's
it's-
got the stadium. Tommy Ocker is known in Holland maybe a little bit, but he's a good player. I saw him play many
So where
times.
were you at during all this? Like, what?
I was in high school. My eyeballs about
so you're all
man.
into it. You're following this whole thing.
I'm telling you, first time tennis used to be on the TV once a year. Once a year, they'd have the U.S. championships on Wide World of Sports. Back in the day, this was the only sports program we had. Children, besides the football being on the telly and the baseball being on the telly, we had Wide World of Sports. It was on Sunday, and it'd have every sport. They'd have skiing. From Europe, satellite delayed skiing. They'd have, they might have had curling even back then, who no one ever heard of. They have all sorts of wackadoodle sports.
Yep.
But Wide World of Sports would have the finals of the U.S. championships before it was U.S. Open. They'd have the finals on there. And if you had on your black and white TV, you could watch it. But that summer in 1968, tennis started to hit the TV in NPR. It wasn't called NPR back then. Educational TV started to cover tennis from Boston. Bud Collins, who became the most well-known and beloved tennis personality, but he was a newspaper man originally, a writer.
Yeah.
But he started covering tennis for one of the Boston educational TV channels.
Huh.
And he did that whole summer of '68. And Arthur Ashe was the story.
Wow.
National amateur singles, national doubles. And U.S. Open, and Bud Collins was on TV, Channel 12 in Philadelphia, was on TV. You heard his voice, and Arthur Ashe from there. So it was like a story.
Yeah.
It wasn't just that it popped up now in Wide World of Sports. Now it's a whole story.
This was when the narrative started to build around the sport. Okay.
And individual sport. 60s? Individuals.
Yep, it's all about the individual.
Oh, down with the machine.
Yep.
individual sport, exciting, amateurs, professionals. Black fella, where'd he come from? What the hell's his backstory? What a great backstory,
So it's
too.
getting people like interested in the story and something that they would never have had exposure to before.
Never been exposed to it at all. I see black people with their helmets on and shit, and Jackie Robinson, whatever. Yeah. Good news.
But it's, again, team sport, so it's like not as highlighted on the individual.
He could be the white person. You know what's happening down south. I don't even know if they showed it down south, for that matter.
Wow.
I don't even know. Maybe it was banned because Arthur Ashe was in it. Maybe there's some technical difficulties. Have to ask my friends in Mississippi about that. But it was news. Now, bang. Now, that's a point of explosion. And I was a junior in high school.
Super impressionable.
Yes, I was. And that was probably the first time I got to watch tennis on the TV, really. I think I took my TV outside, a little portable black and white. I remember putting boxes around, cardboard boxes, and a blanket so I could actually watch it outside because it's too fucking hot to be inside. We didn't have air conditioning back then, children. Didn't have it. Just had fans. So I got outside. I got the thing, and I got to watch it outside. And there's also a very good, this wasn't right then, but it would be a few months later, a very good writer of not sports articles. Oh, God, now I can't remember his name. I told you I'd come up blank. It's called Something in Motion, not Poetry in Motion. Wrote for the New Yorker magazine an incredible article about Arthur Ashe, the young black dude, playing a very privileged white dude in the semifinals of the U.S. Open. And this was a real tough match for Arthur to get through. Clark Graebner.
So when was this?
This was that year, 1968. And Clark Graebner was a New York guy, they called him Superman. He looked like Clark Kent. They looked like Clark Kent.
Okay.
He had it, and he had one of these he had one of these brand new T2000 steel rackets way before Jimmy Connors had come out with it. And he was built solid like an Adonis. And Arthur Ashe was a skinny black dude, looked like he's a lieutenant in the Army, but he looked like he could have come from, straight off the savannah, like he was chasing down cheetahs and shit. He was firm and sleek and everything. I think Graebner was already a lawyer or something, or worked on Wall Street.
You can just imagine the narrative as you say it. This is just all in the media. Like
it was, and that wasn't played big because tennis wasn't big,
right?
But this article came out soon after, and I think it was the New Yorker, which is more literary magazine at the time, and it was a fantastic article, and it's just a contrast, this and that, in the individual sport and the back and forth. And, of course, it mentioned the tennis shots and the way they played. They played very similar. And Arthur Ashe had a traditional wooden racket, and this Clark Graebner, this Clark Kent had this brand new steel shaft, and it was pounding down aces, and so it was just like the ultimate black, white, rich America, poor America. Old tennis, new tennis.
Right.
It just helped things go off. Get the attention of people with money that would be reading like New Yorker. Get their attention and help. Oh that's good. Let's put some money in that. So boom, 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 started to build. These guys who had stole the amateur players, they had put circuits together where these guys would play all during the year in the wintertime when you didn't have traditional tournaments. So they played indoor stadiums like that. Basketball wasn't as big. So places that didn't have basketball teams, they could get this tennis troupe to come on through for a week.
Right.
So it was a traveling thing. And people started to take notice. Tennis was an all-year thing, not just in the warm weather. So it started to build. People started to put money into indoor tennis here in the Northeast. There were some indoor tennis places that popped up right around there. 68, 69, 70. Indoor tennis started to come up where we couldn't play tennis when I was a kid. My brother couldn't play tennis during the winter time. There's no way. I think there's a place, the Armory down in Philadelphia, and most of these armories in the big cities had a very slick cement floor, and they would have, when the National Guard wasn't there using it, they had places marked out. They had tennis courts marked out. Yes, and they had big netting around to keep the balls from flying across. But the armories could accommodate a lot of, but it'd be really fast. It'd be faster than grass, baseball would like shoot through. But that was like it. If you had money or you had connections, you get to the armory and play a little bit. I played in high school in the winter on my gym floor. My coach was young when I got to be a junior, and just out of college, and he was a tennis player. So he would get the gym set aside on a Saturday morning, and we had a portable net, and he had lines drawn on the hallowed basketball, had tennis lines drawn on, and we'd play there. But you know what a gym floor is like, waxed wood. We'd be playing serve again. No, you could hit a ground stroke. You'd have to serve and get your butt to net and try to hit a volley as quick as you can. And if it bounced, you're probably going to lose. So it was different kind of tennis, but it was a lot of like what the pros played because they were playing on fast surfaces too. So it was not attractive tennis. It's not a tennis like we see nowadays. A very attractive sport of stamina and some brute
super
force.
high pace.
This is pace, but short. Bang, bang, bang. An average point might have lasted. An average point, if it went 5 seconds, that would be probably a long point. That's probably 3 hits. That would be a long point. Nowadays, that's a fault.
It's a totally different game.
So it was something else, but it caught the people's attention. It was different. And American money just pushed it. It was all American push. The tennis boom in Europe didn't come till they had their own players. I worked in Europe.
So you're saying it followed tennis. America's boom?
Yes, America made the boom. Now Australia was there, but they didn't have the money.
Right.
They
so
supplied
the culture was with us.
Yes, the culture.
Was there.
Tennis in Australia was like baseball. It was close to baseball. It was neighborhood driven, neighborhood players, and kids played it early with adults. They had leagues, neighborhood leagues. When I worked in Australia,
so kids are growing up, getting really, really good, but there's no infrastructure.
They're just learning by osmosis, and they would have tennis courts in the backyard. Now the backyard wasn't like my 3 acres when I was a kid. The backyard was kind of small.
Yeah.
You could fit a tennis court in there without much running room, and not much else. But in an upper class, middle class, Sydney, say neighborhood, they might have 3 or 4 houses that had courts in their backyard. And some had lights, not very good, but they'd have neighborhood leagues. We just said, oh, come on out, we're playing. It's Wednesday night. Come on out to my place. We're having tennis now. Bring the beer. We'll have something on the barbie, and we're going to have everyone play. So they'd have like a mixed doubles. They'd have men's doubles. They'd have... Well, it wouldn't be any singles. It was all team stuff.
That's
and
cool.
the kids would play in with the adults. If they could hold up the racket, they'd get aces thrown down their neck, and they'd learn to make do, and they'd get up there and volley, and they'd watch, and they'd learn, and didn't have lessons. They paid 50 cents an hour for group lessons or something. Even when I went there in the late 70s. You couldn't make any money as a tennis pro. There's no way. Because it was baseball. You couldn't make any money as a baseball teacher either.
Right.
So it was more like that. And so they provided a lot of players while America provided the money and the place for them to make it. And a lot of them came to live in America, too. I worked for one of them. So tennis just started to swell. And since you could play in all the old spots, it was now a new sport. Wintertime, indoors, fast. And then an old sport with the old venues and everything. And that just made it more interesting. If you're looking,
tons of variables.
Yeah, and it wasn't on TV really, but it started to catch a little bit here and there. The finals, especially if an American was in it, they might find a way to broadcast
it's like
finals.
The Olympics almost. It's just like that like global element of just culture versus culture.
It was year after year after year. You'd have to wait, just built right on.
Yeah.
So tennis really, I was okay at it. It started to build. I got more interest. I got better. And tennis got bigger and better, too, as I went from high school to college. Yeah, and then I wanted to be a teacher. I was trained as a teacher in college. I have a history degree, I'll have you know. And secondary education, comprehensive social studies with a history emphasis. That's what it says on my diploma. That's a lot of words on one diploma. But I was...
So you wanted to be you went to school to be a history teacher?
I went to school, but then I'd already worked 2 years after working in factories for the summer. I said, hell with this. I ended up getting some jobs at summer camps, like your dad,
Right.
like your granddad had worked at. He didn't do that anymore by the time I came around, but the idea was there.
Yeah.
It's a Jewish summer camp. Why should I work there? My brother did. My brother-in-law ran one. Why should I work there? I applied. And 2 summers I worked at a Jewish summer camp where tennis was just one of the sports. It wasn't the sport. It was a sports camp. 8 weeks, poor kids. Oh, my God. So I worked there for 2 different years. And then tennis was big enough that they had actual tennis summer camps. And as a junior and a senior in college then, and after that, I worked at summer tennis camps, and I was learning how to teach, learning from people who knew what they were doing, had been doing it for 20, 30, 40 years, and I got better.
So when did that become work for you? Because you traveled, I know you've traveled all over the world. So with your travels, was that through tennis? Or how did this?
Every one of my travels was because of tennis, except the first.
Okay.
And the first happened right after, I can't say it wasn't because of tennis, but I traveled between junior and senior years over to Germany in a study, now I'm making those inverted quotes, kids, a study tour that was chaperoned by my tennis coach and his girlfriend, who happened to be the female tennis coach. Now, getting on this trip had nothing to do with tennis, but it sold me on going over. I had taken German in school. I had an old German teacher who was well-intentioned but bad. And then my tennis coach came in right out of school and was a German teacher.
Oh, wow.
So I'd already had enough of German in 2 years.
Were you big into German history then? 'Cause
German
the family,
history. Oh,
like
yeah.
PA Dutch and all that.
I was interested in that, but they didn't speak proper German. It wasn't high German. They spoke some bastardized part of German that I couldn't barely understand because they talked so fast.
Yeah.
And there was so much English involved. But I was interested in the culture, and that was my culture. Why should I learn Spanish or French when I'm German?
Of course.
And they never taught me anything. God damn it, I'll learn it better than you. So maybe it's a competitive thing. I don't know. But I had 2 years with a bad teacher, and I got some basics, but I was terrible at writing it. I was getting Fs. A lot of grammar mistakes. Grammar in tennis is grammar in
tennis.
German is bad. Grammar in tennis is not easy either. But grammar in German is horrible for an English speaker. So I was getting a lot of bad marks. But my ear was very good.
Okay.
Because I was Pennsylvania German, maybe, and I'd heard them. Languages are like music. You get a rhythm for it, and you can make yourself sound good even if it's not perfect. I had a friend in New York City who did the best gibberish languages of all time. He didn't know any proper languages, but like Sid Caesar back in the 50s, he could do this fake Italian, fake Spanish, fake French, fake German, fake... He
could say like a real word every 5 words and just kind of gibberish to us.
It would sound, what did he just say? I caught that. No. But that didn't go anywhere. He'd do German at me, and I'd say, no, that was bullshit, Michael. Yeah. But he had the rhythm.
Yeah.
He had an ear for it.
Right.
So I wasn't good at doing that, but I had a rhythm for German, and so I could speak it well. I sounded well.
That does play a lot into understanding someone else's language, because there's certain languages where when you could say something, you could say the words right, but phonetically, if you're off, you could mean a totally different thing.
Very bad thing. Yes, very wrong thing. So as my tennis coach became my German teacher, not only that did that guarantee that perhaps my grades would be better than they should be, but he was a very interesting fellow. And he organized this trip that was a nationwide. This was when America ruled, people. This was the 60s. The dollar was king. King, I tell you. And in Germany, you know how strong Germany is now with the euro. Well, they had Deutschmarks back then, and they were no slouches. There was a miracle, and everyone was working. They were building things. Their main currency, the Deutschmark, there were 4 of them in $1 when I went over there in the 60s. A Deutschmark was a quarter, people. A quarter. So we didn't have a lot of money, but they could organize these trips, send students over there. We had 3 weeks in Austria, 3 weeks in Germany, and we studied, again, the inverted quotes. We had German classes maybe 3 days a week. Most of our time was touring around and seeing cultural things
Right.
and seeing Germany, you
Yeah.
know? So that got me going. And that got me going on travel, probably, which nothing I ever really thought about. Though your grandmother had gone over to Europe on her own in the 50s with a girlfriend.
Really? So post World War II, and
Yes, talk about the dollar ruling and everything. She was over there in the heyday and was over there, and I knew that. I was only 5 or something when she came home, but I had a little present from Venice, had a little gondola, so maybe that got in the back of my head. But she'd gone over there on her own, organized by her and her cousin. And so that might have gotten in the back of my head. This was a well-organized thing, but it was right in the middle of my tennis progression, and I couldn't do much. I took my racket with me, which is unheard of, and I did rally balls against walls, but I couldn't really play much tennis over there.
Yeah.
It wasn't an opportunity. It wasn't set up as a sporting thing. It was set up as a study thing and a cultural thing.
Right.
And tennis was... looked like at that time American culture, wasn't European culture.
Right.
So I did get to play once on my trip over there. My brother, who was working for IBM, got a job with IBM in Europe in 1969 when I was over there, and took time off. And he and his wife came to visit me in Austria, where I was, and he paid for us to play tennis on European clay courts.
No way.
At the club in Austria where they hold the national championships of Austria still today.
That was like a dream.
Oh, I know. It was. I'd never been on a real clay court before. The feet are going like this.
Yeah.
It's like you're playing on ball bearings, people.
Right.
It's nasty.
Super fast, too.
But it's red. It's brick dust. And you would get like dirty. Didn't feel dirty. Didn't look dirty. It was like red. He had nice red
chic.
socks.
It was chic dirty.
It was lovely. Brick-colored socks. And your sneakers are all different type. It wasn't dusty. Yeah, danky. No.
Yeah.
It was European red. It's class.
Right.
Had class. So I had to get to play over there once, and that was nice. It probably helped, even though I couldn't improve my game, it helped build the
inspiration and all that.
Inspiration. And then the travel.
Yeah.
And I've been reading these magazines about the tour traveling to Europe and everything, so fuel my imagination a little bit, I guess. And I didn't have any money, so I never traveled again to overseas until after I'd spent some years doing tennis as a business after I graduated from college.
So you got into teaching tennis,
yes,
right?
Teaching tennis because there was opportunity.
Yeah, it was
That's
new.
the only reason.
Yep.
I got my diploma here and said I can teach secondary education. And I did my student teaching. I said, yeah, you got to dress up in a suit and a tie back in the day.
Wasn't
and all
your
this.
style.
I said, why would I want to do that when I could wear short pants and be out in the sunshine and make more money? Why would I want to do that? Okay, diploma, go in the closet now.
Right.
So I had some jobs. It took me a while to get a real job after school. I sort of starved a little bit, but people are used to doing that right out of school. I worked at an indoor building where I wasn't teaching tennis. I was just working the desk.
Yeah.
But I could play tennis after hours. Me and my buddies would go out there and we'd have our own tournaments out there. God knows. Knock on wood, you don't know about that out there in Lancaster, but that's what we did. And had a nice hot tub and et cetera. But I did that for a little while and then worked in the summer again with a better class of tennis club and built up a resume a little bit, and learned some stuff. And then that winter of 75, I didn't have much money in the bank, and I was sharing a place with a 3-bedroom apartment with 3 guys. It wasn't overcrowded or anything, but one of them was doing student teaching. One of them was working a rehab center, sociologist. That's what he graduated as, and I wasn't doing much of anything. I was a bum living
Just
on
bumming out.
Yeah, living on noodles and just didn't have ramen back then, guys. Canned spaghetti I was living in, so I had some money, and I was applying. To places, to work full time. Nothing much was coming back, so I did, however, in the spring, after a long winter of discontent, in the spring I just happened to be home in Pennsylvania, in Percy, and the phone rang. And in those days we didn't have cell phones, kids. There was one phone in the home, and you had a phone. If you gave out the number, you gave out your home phone. Where I lived in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, do we have a phone? Yeah, we had a phone, but I didn't give out that number. I didn't know how long I was going to be there in that apartment. So I gave out the home phone with Mom and Dad. And I just happened to be home. The phone goes, ring, ring. Pick up the phone and say, yes, hello. I said, hello there. Is Scott Leatherman there? I said, yes, this is he. Oh, mate. Oh, this is Graham Mosley here from Nuke's Tennis Ranch down in New Braunfels, Texas, which I'd heard of, by the way, since John Newcomb is one of the best tennis players in the world. And I knew he had a tennis camp in Texas. I said, yes. Well, mate, we got your resume, and we think you'd be a good fit for us down here. And I listened, I said, now who the hell is this?
Get a prank call.
Yeah. We didn't have prank calls yet, but it sounded like a prank call to me. His accent was
Australian
was
accent.
real Australian accent, and it sounded too much Australian. So, no, mate, it's me. It's Graham Mosley. We really like to have you down here, and we think you fit right in. I said, when? Well, mate, as soon as you can. We can use you now. This is like March, and down in Texas, that's starting of the tennis.
Right.
Tennis
Season,
gets bloody hot by May already. I said, well, I guess I could get down there in a week or so. Oh, yeah, right, that'd be fine. Now, here's my number. Just call me when you know exactly when, and we'll have things all set for you, all right?
Wow.
Yeah, that's fine. So I sort of started. I didn't even go woohoo that I can remember. I just said, "Oh, I think I've got a job in Texas." Now got to think about how to get all my shit settled and drive down. I'd drive down. Didn't have any money to go any other way, but I had a job when I got there. It was room and board.
Wow.
Room and board, X amount of much per week, which sounded great to me. Didn't have to pay any money out, just...
Did Newcomb have other places, or was this like the headquarters?
That was his headquarters.
Okay.
He actually lived there because he was still playing the circuit. This was 1976. He was still playing the circuit. That was one of the older ones. He might have been, that time, he was 30-something. Not as old as Roger Federer, but he was getting there. And he didn't do much of that back then. Though he was the first wave of tennis players who were making money.
Yeah,
See,
right.
he was one of those, but... out of the amateur days, he had won Wimbledon as an amateur in 1967. Had won as the last amateur.
Wow.
And when it came to pros, tennis at 68, I think he'd lost maybe he made it to the quarterfinals. I'm not even sure. And he certainly wasn't seeded very high.
Yeah.
He was the ex-champion. And he might have got seeded, I have to look this up, but they only seeded 16 players. It was 128 men. They only seeded 16. I'm pretty sure he made the top 16.
Yeah.
But just only because he was a past champion. And he didn't make it, I don't think, as quarterfinals. He was out. So, but he did win Wimbledon twice more as a professional later on. So, he was one of my idols. I applied a lot of different places. This is probably the place that I would have most wanted to go, though I didn't know crap about Texas or about the camp or anything. But it was John freaking Newcomb, for God's sake. He's the best player ever. I learned stuff from watching him play. I said, yeah.
Did you meet him?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, he used to be there a lot. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he used to be there a lot. That was his home base because a lot of the business was still in America.
Yeah,
so he was based there. Yeah, I worked for him, worked with him on the court. He got me to go places to do exhibitions and stuff because I was a little bit older in that I was 22. No, wait, 67. I was 24.
Right.
2 years out of college. So I was a little bit older where a lot of the guys were maybe right out of college or they had summer help. Mm-hmm. So they were in college. So I was like 24. I was older and I loved Australian culture and I got along with everybody. So I'd go places with him and the other guys and do exhibitions and this and that, set things up. And it just so happened that year in 1976, the bicentennial year, I was down there in Texas away from all the revelry up here in the Northeast, which I was a bit chuff about. But as I was down there, Newcomb and his doubles partner, Tony Roach, who was also one of the best tennis players at that time, also bought into the professional ranks at the same time as Newcomb, because I think they might have won the Wimbledon amateur doubles that last year, too. So they were both bought up. In 68, group was called the Handsome Eight.
Huh.
Handsome.
Good name.
Yes, they were all very handsome. They were from Australia and all over. That was the Lamar Hunt group, I think. Yeah, it was the Lamar Hunt group, the Handsome Eight. So they were considering, or I guess they were already working on it, starting a summer camp in Australia based on the American summer camp, which is not a global phenomenon, as it turns out. It is an American phenomenon, sleepaway camp for X amount of weeks or whatever, doing a thing or doing generally all sorts of things. Doesn't happen other places. It happens in America. So them having spent a lot of time here and knowing people who did it, decided that would be a good thing to do in Australia.
Yeah.
Because Australia, they had camps. Again, we're neighborhood based. Maybe you'd give day camp type of thing like we think of. You go to a neighborhood and the one guy knew something about tennis and he'd have a little camp with 8 kids and they'd be hitting balls all over the damn place and they'd have to run laps or I don't know what they did. But this was a sleepaway camp, a 1-week sleepaway camp. And we thought, well, give this a try. They get some sponsorship. It's, big names. If anyone's going to catch attention, these two would. And they were mates. They were friends, and that counts for a lot. And they're both from Sydney, Australia. It's just the biggest town, biggest city at the time. And the camp they were going to have it in was in a university out in the country, like from Philadelphia, like Penn State, out in the country. It's out in the country, not close to the city. Yeah, you had to drive a few hours. And so they got this country town, which just happened to be the hometown of the fellow who ran the tennis camp in Texas for Newcomb, Graham Mosley, who caught me on the phone with a funny accent there. Just happened to be his hometown of, what is it? Out there in New South Wales. The university was University of New England. And the little town was, oh my goodness, I lost the name of the town.
Who cares?
Yeah. Those Aussies will kill me, but we don't have too many Aussies in the podcast, I reckon.
A couple. I've seen a couple.
You got some Aussies?
Yeah, just a couple.
Well, it's out there in New England, mate. It's out there over the Blue Mountains, eh?
Maybe one of them will message me.
Yeah, it's a university in New England. And for some reason, I can't remember the name right now, though I spent many happy hours. Yeah. Crack tube. Anyway. Crack tube. Anyway. Having started that camp and him knowing, maybe by looking at my resume or maybe me mentioning it into his ear, that I had lots of summer camp experience in America, which no one in Australia had any idea about. He said, "Oh, Scotty, would you like to come to Australia this summer?
Wow.
We're having a tennis camp." He said, after, replaced my dentures in my mouth, I said, "Oh, sure, digger. Yeah. But, I don't have a whole lot of money." "Oh, mate, we can't pay your way out there. But once you're there, we'll give you so much per week. And room and board, just like here." I said, "Oh, right. Off you go. Yeah, I'll be there." So, as it turned out, it was $1,000 to get there and back in 1976 money. With stagflation, people. Look that one up. With stagflation, it was a poop load of money. But again, I was working for room and board, and I spent his beer and silliness, so I had money in the bank. And $1,000 was a round trip, well spent. And I had friends down there. So once I got there, again, maybe not room and board, but I had room and place to stay for nothing.
Yeah. And
guides, and people who show me about until I went to camp and then I was pretty much taking care of it. And again, it was beer money.
So how long did you do that?
Well, I went there for the first camp. That was 76, 77. It was right over the New Year holiday. And those camps lasted 3 weeks. And I spent like at least 2 months in Australia with friends and spending the money that I'd earned on tourism.
Right.
Yeah, I had a good time.
Seeing the land, you're there.
Yeah, I was working 3 weeks and spent maybe 6 more weeks there. So in Texas, nothing much happens except rain and nastiness between January and March. So I had pretty much had 3 months
there. Okay,
yeah, I pretty much took up the slack there. Otherwise, I'd be painting rooms back at the tennis camp in Texas. So, I spent my ill-gotten gain and came back broke and happy and then started all over again in Texas now with the heat building. So it was summers in Australia and then summers in Texas for a couple years. That was some hot years. But 76, I did it every summer, 76 to 82. Okay. 82 was the last summer. So every Australian summer I'd go down there. And then when I came back to America, I worked in Texas for 2 years. And at that time, also worked for Newcomb in Vermont a little bit. We'd have a month in Vermont, which was godsend because he started tennis camp up there. After the Texas heat, Vermont was so nice.
Oh, I bet.
It was like dessert. It was so nice. I would have died 4 months in Texas, but 3 months was all right. And then I ended up with an Australian girlfriend, so we made our own circuit. We did maybe 6 months in Australia, and then overseas in Germany, or United States, and then we went to England to see Wimbledon, and then we worked in Germany, and then we came back to the United States and ended up back in Australia. So we did our own little circuit for a year or 2 years. I guess we did that. So that was a bit of traveling. Again, all tennis-oriented. I wouldn't have done any of it without tennis, basically. And that provided the money as well as the reason for being there. But it was the engine and the cause. And then in that time when I was doing Australia and back to Texas, Nuke had another idea. He had businesses all over in the Far East. He had a business group that was called one thing. It was called Nuke Plus 4. And he had a business group that was called Nuke Plus 2, and I forget what they did. But he had a business group in America that was, I guess it was Texas was based in T-Bar M, which was his first business. It was Newcomb and two Texas guys. It was Tut Parts and Clarence Mabry, who were older guys from Texas, and they did this camp that I worked at originally. But Nuke had other jobs, and since he knew me, and again, I was a little bit older and could be trusted. Yeah. And he said, Scotty, we're starting a new camp in the Fiji Islands. And I thought, Fiji Islands. I had to go back in my computer. I said, Fiji. There was no Google back then, kids. No Google. So everything I knew was from reading the encyclopedia or listening in class when most people were sleeping. Right. But I knew the Fiji Islands. I knew it was in the South Pacific, and that was more obvious because Newcomb was doing it. It had to be over in the Far East if it wasn't Europe. And he was starting a tennis camp there with some partners, and he had an American partner who had, originally made money from building, what was it? Shopping malls in California in the 60s. Wow. Which was a boom business, I'll tell you. Jeez. It was a boom business. So he made money, and he had some business dealings, this fella Dennis, in Australia. And he flew over to Australia to talk some deals, probably for Australian shopping malls. I don't know if they're ready for them in the early 70s. But as he came back, the planes didn't have 747s yet. They didn't fly right across the Pacific. The planes all stopped in Fiji as a refueling spot and stopped in Hawaii. That was about as far as they could safely go. So Dennis was coming from Sydney. First stop was in Fiji. There was a mechanical problem on the plane. He couldn't carry on till the next day. There was only one plane in and one plane out. So they had put him up at a hotel. Did some exploring? Yes. Well, he said, he went to the cab driver and said, he was a big California big shot American. He said, take me to the best hotel you got around here. So, yeah, right, bosso? The Indian fellow clamped down the door and boom, off he went. And it was a paved road, but soon the paved road gave way to gravel. And the airport was far behind him. Dennis is thinking, where am I going? Where am I going? I'm going to be kidnapped or killed out here. I don't know this guy. And where the hell? As the bumpity road carried on, and he's chattering away with the Indian fellow and can understand half of what he's saying. He's getting very concerned, but there's nothing much he can do about it now. The car comes up to the top of a hill. And down below, it's moonlight now. Down below, there's a beautiful lagoon, and it's lit by a few lights. And there's a building down there. It just shines off the water, and it's called the Fijian, and it was built by the people from Pan Am back in the early 60s, because the Pan Am people had blazed all those trails across the Pacific with like clipper boats and everything. Wow. Well, they needed a good place to stay. Fiji was a bit of a backwater. It was a British colony, big for sugar cane, but wasn't involved in World War II except as a supply base. It was too far out from where the Japanese were attacking. But, we had some American influence there that helped build things up, as we do. Had to build a big airfield there. That became the international airport. I found out later that They had one paving machine. This is asphalt. One asphalt paving machine in the entire country. It was owned by the government. And it was a leftover from World War II.
Wow.
That the Seabees had left them by the bequeathment of the U.S. government. So, yeah, it's a bit of a backwater Fiji, but beautiful place. And you're talking tropical paradise. This is what you'd see. And this is what Dennis saw. Dennis McElrath, as he came over, was worried about being killed or scalped or whatever. Here's this beautiful lagoon with this nice little building. He said, I guess that was worth the trip. And he down there, and he found out that's the only place that's worthwhile in the whole damn side of the country. The capital's in the other end of the island. And it was about, with the bad roads, maybe it was an hour from the airport. Well, being a real estate guy said,
I got to invest here.
Well, I got you better than that. An hour from the airport. This is beautiful, but it's 1960s, all right?
Yeah,
I can do better. I can build a place, get it close to the airport. We get people coming in, they stay, and they see how gorgeous this place is. Yeah, I can do this. So from this, he cancels his flight. He's going to go out a little bit later. He meets up with some people, ends up being a real estate guy. He makes a deal. Like someone else we know.
Of course.
He was a deal maker. This is Dennis. He's a deal maker from California. He made a deal with the locals for this land that was basically a mangrove swamp. It was a little island of its own, but not an island. I mean, it was the big island of Fiji is about as big as the biggest island in Hawaii. And the airport's on the eastern side of the island. The capital's on the western side of the island. There's mountains in the middle. And there's a wet side and a dry side. Well, the airport just happens to be, by no coincidence, on the dry side. And the capital happens to be on the wet side by bad luck because that's where the Fijians had their capital before the Brits moved in. So dry side, airport. Dry side, this nice hotel, an hour's drive away. Dry side, this little Denarau Island that Dennis found that's separated from the main island by about 100 feet of murky water.
Okay.
And it's basically a mangrove swamp, which means you don't have nice white beaches. You have mangrove trees that are sort of muddy and get into a lagoon somewhere.
Yeah.
But an island that he could use and build on, and the local people could get a percentage of and what have you. It all goes to the local tui. So he does his deal, builds this place. Gorgeous. I mean, he's a partner. He gets someone else, I guess, other people to come in, but he's the main doer and shaker and the main partner. Builds this place with the Regent group. And the Regent at the time was a very high-class hotel chain. In New York City, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, they had them. I mean, it was mostly Far East Australia, Sydney, and Melbourne. I think had a region at one time. They were high-class places. Yeah. But this is a real resort. They didn't have those. They're often downtown and classy places to stay. Dennis makes a deal with these guys. So it's a regent of Fiji. Newcomb somehow meets this American guy, gets their heads together. Guys from California, remember, we need tennis. We need some more tennis here. Now, Dennis played a little bit of tennis, not well. But when he put the hotel in, he needed, amusements.
Yeah.
He put down an area that had grass courts on it.
Wow.
Now, Fiji being a tropical place, you can imagine, grew some pretty nice grass. Grew some good grass.
Yeah.
He stole, with the money, the groundskeeper at the local lawn tennis club in Nandi.
Oh, wow.
Paid him probably triple his salary, which is still a pittance, to be the groundskeeper on a really nice place instead of a shitty old post-colonial joint that was falling apart. So Bai Drew was a man, and Bai knew his grass, even though the other place had bad grass. This place had the good grass. Did a little research, and Bai took care of this grass like his baby. So we had an area that was big enough for 3 courts, but you couldn't use 3 and 3. You couldn't use 3 and 3. You'd have to use 2 and 2 because grass courts, you got to move them around because of the wear pattern. So they had like 4 really nice grass courts. But they're real grass. You can't put lights on them. So they're only good for the daytime. And even though this is the dry side of the island, it has a rainy season. Clouds come over the hills. they've dropped most of their moisture on the wet side of the island. They come over the hills, come down the hills towards Denarau Island, and they have just enough water left in them for about a 15-minute fierce shower, and then move off to sea. So during the rainy season, almost every afternoon, there'd be a fierce shower of 10, 15 minutes. Courts in the afternoon, about 3 o'clock. Courts are totally soaked. It was very hot and very humid. Courts would not dry, even though it had some tropical breezes, would not dry till about the next day at 1 o'clock, where it was frighteningly hot and humid.
Oh,
and
geez.
maybe if you were really desperate to play tennis, you could play for an hour and a half or so before the next rain shower comes back down. So this grass court was not the best. It was beautiful and it was perfect for the setting, but it was not a resort type thing.
Yeah.
You couldn't. So Newcomb knew that when he got into the deal, and part of the deal was Newcomb's tennis camp, South Pacific Tennis Resort, would have some improved courts with lights, modern lights. And that was part of the deal. So me being the oldest one, when he more or less already had this deal struck up, he had Dennis come to Texas. He came up to me one day and say, "Scotty, I'd like to meet this bloke here. He's one of your countrymen, Dennis McElrath. He's from California. I'm in business with him in the Fiji Islands." I said, I'm thinking, Fiji, okay, I sort of know where that is. How you doing, mate? How you doing? I said, yeah, well, we're thinking about this tennis ranch down there, and I'm thinking you'd be the bloke to run it. Okay. This is 1979. I'm like 26 by that time. 27. Yeah, 27. I've been a tennis coach. I never run a goddamn thing, and not even a popcorn stand or a lemonade stand when I was a kid. I wasn't interested in that. But I was going to have to be not just a pro, but the manager of this place. And, as they explained to me, find out a way to get real courts in this place.
Right.
That only had, which I loved, lawn tennis courts, but only had tennis courts that were good for eight months a year. So, okay. Yeah, I could do that. That sounds fine. Done with Texas by now. It's now the third or fourth summer of 100-degree heat coming on, and he came up to me at a very important time.
Yeah, you're ripe to get out.
Yeah, right before the heat came. He came to me and talked about it in May, so it was starting to get hot. And the kids were starting to come, and oh my God, I said, I can't do this again. So yes. I said, yes, let's do that. And we talked a little bit of money, and sounded fine with me. Room and board.
Yep.
And they paid for my way to get there this time. I wasn't like Australia. They paid for me to get there. And I had vacation. And I could go down to Australia because it was the rainy season in Fiji. I could go down to Australia and still do what I did.
How far is Fiji from Australia again?
If you're on your flight, it'd be like New York to Bahamas or something like that. Yeah, maybe a little more. Maybe New York, Puerto Rico, it might be 2 hours, something like that. 2 hours and a bit to Sydney. And it was like a vacation spot for Aussies and New Zealanders. It was about the same.
Right.
And it was relatively cheap. So it was a big spot. Not many Americans, not many North Americans come through there. It was not number one. Tahiti, yes, it's out of the way. Of course, they're French and very stuck up. Our people are very friendly and they speak English. So it was a natural play for Canadians and Americans to go to Fiji, but they didn't really promote. They didn't have a lot of money.
Right.
And again, they were hoping maybe this would help open it up with the tennis boom and all.
Like the economy there.
Yes.
It's like, what was the history like in Fiji? Like, for people who don't know, like, kind of like in this era, like, kind of like as it's being industrialized and cultures are moving on.
Fiji had a very odd sort of colonial backdrop. Mm-hmm. Fiji was a port for the whalers back in the 18th or 19th century, 18th too. But the whalers come through for supplies, and they were pretty rough, those Fijians. They're Melanesians, which think of East Africans, basically, not Polynesians, light skin. These are I would say milk chocolate colored consistently, not like America, where our African Americans came from all different places and mixed with all different types of people. No, in Fiji, they're Fijians. Then they're pretty much all milk chocolate and all got the kinky hair, and not what you expect for South Pacifics. But this is a big part of South Pacific. I mean, from New Guinea to Micronesia is a mix, but Melanesia is what they call that area. And you say, where do these guys come from? that's a hell of a boat ride from East Africa, but they look exactly like what you'd expect, from watching Tarzan movies, and not Fijians, but African. And yet that's the way it is. Culture's been going on forever. They can't figure out exactly when they got there.
So interesting. So no one know? Or?
They don't know exactly. They have, again, you have like stories, because Fijian is not a written culture, it's a verbal culture, and some of that stuff is written down from the old days, and there's stories about the boats, coming out, and the boats finding the place. But, on the timeline, it's generational, Oh, grandfather 15 times ago came here.
Right.
What?
You have no idea.
No.
Like as far as like a history book's concerned, there's no way to track it.
It's a little tough. I'm sure nowadays with, now this is the 70s I'm talking about. So nowadays with DNA and whatnot, I'm sure that, and they are zeroing in on where they came from, these people. And they might even be related, if I remember right. They could be way back related to the Aboriginal people of Australia, which look more African than Tahitian, So it could go back that far. I forget now. Things I read, some bits stick in my head and some don't. But in that day, all I had was the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Right.
So when I had accepted this job, I had to gather up all my stuff in Texas and take it back to Pennsylvania because I didn't need a car. I had to take my car back. One of my brother-in-laws bought it. Take all my gear back to Pennsylvania, let it sit there, and then, set up for the trip there. So we had Encyclopedia Britannica, take out Fiji, reading a thing on that. Wasn't a whole lot to read, but I read what I could, got a little bit of background, and that was the most I knew before I had stopped in Fiji on my first trip to Australia. It was, again, I didn't have a 747. Canadian Pacific Airline was an old airline. It was the cheapest way to get there, so it flew out of San Francisco to Hawaii, Hawaii to Fiji, Fiji to Sydney. So I made 2 stops. And I got in Fiji. All I knew about Fiji was I got there about 6 in the morning. This was in January. Got out of the air-conditioned plane, boom, hit with this wall of frickin' humidity. That just cut my way through with my fingernails.
Oh.
And the sun was just rising. There was a sunrise. It was 6-ish in the morning. I didn't know with my wristwatch what frickin' time it was, but it was sunrise, and it was this hot already.
Wow.
After the air conditioning, it was very hot. And I struggled into the... you had time for them to refuel and clean the plane, so you got out and you go duty free or whatever, even at 6 in the morning. So I went to the terminal. No air conditioning in the terminal.
Oh, geez.
It was just as hot as outside and no breeze. So I didn't need any. I guess I didn't get any duty free. I went outside and stood where I could catch an occasional breeze because we're not that far from the water. And that's all I remember from Fiji.
You just knew it was humid.
Get me back in the frickin' plane where the air conditioning is, please. So that's all I knew from Fiji. And it was beautiful. It was pretty. There's a lovely sunrise. There was palm trees and, it looked nice. There was water. I could hear the crashing waves. That's all I knew, except my Encyclopedia Britannica, which did not help me, did not elucidate things, and a few stories maybe that little bit that Dennis mentioned about Fiji. So I took the plane. I knew probably less about Fiji than Neil Armstrong knew about the moon when he went there. I'm sure he knew a shitload more about the moon than I knew about Fiji. But hey, I knew there was oxygen there, and it was green, and had a nice sunrise. And they got green grass courts. Hell, what could go wrong? So I take myself, boom, flying to Fiji. And beautiful hotel. I mean, I'd stayed in some nice places. I'd seen some rich people's joints. This is a very nice hotel. Beautiful grounds. It was nice. It had a little 9-hole pitch and putt golf course that wasn't well maintained. I think the swamp was sort of reclaiming it. But they had the grass courts, and it was not rainy season. It was dry season. They were beautifully manicured. The color was lovely. And the fencing was like, it was not chain link. It was like, it was like netting from the fishermen. They threw us in their nets so we could put that down to keep the ball from flying out. And it was a grass shack was my pro shop. It was a lean-to, actually. A lean-to with a little section cordoned off with a desk. And so the grass shack was my office. And I had a lovely, I stayed in the hotel. That was where I stayed, my room and board. And it wasn't too far, just a short little walk to tennis courts. And there I was, 3 meals a day provided by the hotel. That was part of my deal. And did I have an alcohol tab? I don't think I had an alcohol tab. I had to pay for my own alcohol. Damn them! But anyhow.
Couldn't be that good.
Yeah. Damn, I knew I left something out. I need a lawyer for my contract. I only had me. So I was missing something, but that was all. And I had a spunky little girl, a gal it wasn't a girl, she was older than me, a gal who was from there, a New Zealander who had lived in Fiji and gone away to school and come back and had a family. Robin, she was my assistant. So my girl Robin, and we just, started to get programs, to make up ideas on what kind of group lessons we could have, what it would cost, the whole thing. And we're also thinking about what are we going to do about an office? We need something to, if we're going to sell things, we need something. I need something that's covered, not just a grass shack.
A lean-to office.
Yes, sometimes the rain comes sideways and all this stuff. So, and we also started to think about what kind of courts we're going to build. That's when I found out there was only one asphalt machine in the entire country of Fiji, owned by the government.
From World War II.
Yes, and it was booked from now till oblivion. So I was not going to get asphalt courts like we have in America. That was not going to happen. So I didn't know where I was going to go after that, but eventually, Providence took a hand. Well, that first year, first few months, I was pretty disoriented. I was meeting people all the time and trying to remember their names and what they were. And I didn't have an automobile. I didn't have any way to get around. This was a very lovely place, but there's no way to get off the island, off our little island into the bigger island, which had, God knows, very few distractions, but did have a downtown area where you could buy things. And they had a movie who played basically Hindi movies, but once in a while would have an English or a European movie dubbed into English, but I couldn't get there. So Robin took me, and then I'd have to hitchhike my way back, which I did not like the idea of. It gets very dark in the tropics when there's snow.
There's no lights anywhere.
There's no lights around. It's very dark. It's even darker than Texas.
What's the sky like? Did you see the Milky Way?
Oh, yeah. Well, Texas you could, too. Wow. You get out in the middle. It was still pretty underdeveloped. Nowadays, they tell me New Braunfels is more built up, more almost like a sleeping community for San Antonio and Austin. It's sort of between the two. But I'd never seen the Milky Way like in Texas. You got out from the tennis courts and you just lay down and say, fuck, what's that?
Right.
Yeah, a cloud. It's a clear sky day. That's stars, for Christ's sake. It's just
That's
a cloud. I'd never seen it in Pennsylvania, never really seen that. So that was interesting. Yeah, in Fiji, it was a totally different sky now. Southern Cross and not the. So yeah, it was a different kind of cloud, but clear and beautiful. So it was a very nice place, and the people were lovely, and they had a club of locals that would use the place, and all the locals were merchants, and all the locals were East Indian, out of the subcontinent, India. Turns out that the English, when we could call it bequeathed the Fiji Islands by the paramount chief of Fiji. It was about 1870. And they were bequeathed by the paramount chief, the islands of Fiji, because the Fijians had created a debt with a country called the United States of America by having an altercation with one of their whaling ships who had done probably some cultural and delicate things and riled up the natives, and the natives hence burned the American.
Wow.
It wasn't an embassy. It wouldn't have had an embassy. It would have had the consulate. They burned the American consulate, and America was holding them at ransom for $40,000.
Wow.
The country
just the whole country.
Yes, country, because the paramount chief He wasn't actually the chief of the whole country.
Yeah, how does that work? Because are there multiple tribal identities?
There are. Now, he was the strongest.
What's the population like there?
Well, at that time, of course, it was all Fijian. And there was, there were tribal groups around, and they were pretty fierce. Fijians were known as cannibals across the Pacific, and pretty fierce. And they were larger than normal. They said they had an African, look to them, which was a little odd for the sailors because it's not the normal thing in the Pacific. But they're also bigger. I mean, the Fijians are broad. They're well-shaped. And they were a little taller than average, not what you'd think. And the women were too. They were solidly built, and not unattractive, and just different. So these guys were warriors. You could tell by the look of them, Well, warriors, the warfare there was small scale, tribe to tribe. And part of the warfare turns out that cannibalism became a ritual part of it. You wouldn't have to kill tons of people in the warfare, but if you're taken captive or wounded or whatever, you might end up in the dinner plate.
Yeah.
And
it's so insane.
Your rank in the tribe that won would determine which parts you were entitled to as well. Now, the brain was big. They had picks for brains. They had these three thing pick that you go take little bits out of the brain. That was pretty good. The naughty bits down there were a delicacy.
Also prized.
Yes, so the chief, I think, I had big juju, so.
Yeah.
So the chief, I think, would get the naughty bits, and maybe he'd give a bit to you if you did a good job out there with your war club. I mean, these guys were wielding Stone Age weapons.
Yeah.
When the Americans and the Brits and everybody had their black powder, these guys were, I've seen the war clubs. I mean, we're pretty fierce, and these are big dudes, big old piece of solid wood with a chunk of big round ball of granite or something in there, and a flint point out the other end. So they whop you over the head and stab or cut your throat with the other piece.
So the British had essentially bought their ransom?
The Tui had, the king, the paramount chief Tui is like a duke, but he was a paramount chief. He was the head guy. He had pretty much, the Americans threatened to, lay torch to the whole place with their boats. It was gunboat diplomacy. You give us some money, motherfucker, we're going to burn your ass down. So I said, I don't have any money. I'll find out a way to do it. So supposedly the Fijian chief sent a delegation to England. Now, they had islands around the area, Samoas, I guess, Solomons in those times.
All over.
They had little bits and pieces around there, and Fijian was a little too fierce. They didn't mess with them. So sent a delegation to Queen Victoria in like the 1850s or something, 60s, I guess, after her husband died, I reckon, 60s. And Queen Victoria listened, and I just said, we are not interested at this time in this proposition. Thank you very much.
Huh.
Turned down the colony, handed to her. They couldn't find a way. They weren't thinking of a way to make it pay. Again, it was another of a similar colony, and it was later colonialism. Okay. So it wasn't just grabbing things to grab them. Now, how do you make this pay? How do you make this property pay its way?
Yeah.
This is on the other side of the freaking world. How do we get our money out of this?
Right. What kind of investment is
I
this?
Can't just be throwing money at you, paying off these Americans. How am I going to make more money off of you? So the Queen said, no, thank you. And, he had no other ideas. No, he wasn't going to go to the French. They were out there. And they sent another delegation a few years later, still Queen Victoria, but different prime minister and what have you. And maybe 10 years later, America's been threatening them for 10 years or more. Give us our money. We have you. Went back, and the ideas had changed a little bit.
Okay.
Or they'd found a paying crop, and it was sugarcane. And the Caribbean had sort of wore itself out. That was original sugarcane, came from there. It's a slave culture down that way. Well, they banned slavery, and the sugarcane plantations in the Caribbean probably weren't producing what they would. So, and they had a colony in India that would soak up all sorts of foodstuffs they might need to supply, and this was closer to there. I don't know whether they were thinking the sugar cane to Britain or sugar cane to Australia, to India, some of the other colonies. Sugar needed them too. And without slavery, well, this place has the right climate for sugarcane. We could grow it here. We could make some money. Let's do it. All right, King, you're on. They made the deal. $40,000. The Americans said, thank you very much. I'm out. Boom. Got their money and ran. And the Brits came over with their delegation, took over. They found out the Fijians were very communal. All right, everything's owned by the group, and work is done, and everyone benefits from that work. But actually working for someone else to make them money and to give you a little bit of it, not in and of their culture at all.
Right.
So the Brits would say, here, my good man, we need you to work in the fields. The Fijians are looking to say, fuck you, knock you in the head with my war club.
Right. It's like, and it's totally different. Yeah, totally different understanding.
That's my land. I'm not going to be working for you in my land. What are you talking about? You talk to my Tui. He'll tell you what to go.
And like, what was that even like diplomatically with the Tui? Because like, were there multiple Tuis? Like, how did this work?
There were Tuis, and they were like, again, sort of like a duke.
Yeah.
So my Tui and Nandi had made the deal with Dennis for this little island, and there was Tuis down where that original Pan American resort was. There was another Tui that was down by the really Sika. Oh, I can't remember. Honey. There was another Tui down there, and there was the king would run more of the wet side of the island.
Okay.
But there's Tuis up in Lautoka, which was a little further north. There was a Tui up Tui Mba, who I did run into later. And Tui Mba, turns out, had the northern part of the big island, and he was not genetically of the same stuff as the paramount king and these other Tuis.
Oh, interesting.
It turns out that this Tui Mba happened to be he was of Tongan origin. The Tongans was another little set of islands not too far from Fiji, same type of people, probably even fiercer than the Fijians.
Wow.
And they had at some point decided to raid the Fijians over many years, and they had been successful enough to take over maybe a quarter of this little island. The Tongans ran the upper part of the island, and they'd been intermixed with the Fijians over the years. So, I mean, they were still genetically, they thought of themselves as different.
Did they look much different?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, didn't look the same. Didn't look much different at all. But at Tonga, the king of Tonga, they still have their king.
To this day?
Yes.
Wow.
And they're
Never even heard of Tonga.
Independent. Never got colonized, Tonga. A protectorate of some sort. I think with the British they worked something out. But they said, no, we've had enough of these guys. Fijians are bad enough. I think we'll leave these Tongans alone. And the Tongans, I guess, just made their way without any bullshit. Where they played the French off against the British. I don't know, but they're independent.
That's
and their
wild.
king was running things.
How big is the population
Not
there?
Not that big. Not that big. It's just a couple islands. It's less than Fiji, I think. I mean, Fiji, when I was there, total population, there's 300 islands. Now, the islands are about, an island could be as big as this building, or, Vitulevu, which was the island I was on, called the Big Island in Fiji, and Vitulevu, that was big as the biggest Hawaiian island. And
oh, wow.
Vanuatu, what was the second one? Vanuatu was more stretched out, looking like about Long Island size.
So the tribes could range from what, like 100 people to a couple thousand people or something like that?
It depends on the topography, I guess, how they spread out or how much, land was arable and stuff as to how well they, spread. But those fighting Tongans, they hit the top part. So the Tui Mba was up there. And he knew, he didn't have enough strength to say "F you" to the king, know, Kakambao. I think that was the king Kakambao. So he couldn't say "F you," but he said, all right, you're my king, but leave me the fuck alone.
Yeah.
Right? He was basically up there taking care of business by himself over all these years, and they did pretty much leave him alone. And Ba agricultural land, had some mountains. So I guess they had a little bit of everything. It wasn't the richest section of the country, but they might have had the gold mines up there. I went to visit the gold mines once. That was one of their money makers. Their biggest money maker was sugarcane. Their second traditional money maker was coconuts. Now, not the coconut meat, the coconut outside and stuff. Made gunpowder with that.
Wow.
You needed that for gunpowder, yes. So Britain had
How did that work?
South Pacific countries that for World War I, World War II, well, World War II, they sort of cut off. But World War I, they had that was an important part for the gunpowder. I forget, and not black powder, not in the old days, but the new smokeless powder, that was part of that coconut was important. Was it
unique to that area, or
no? I mean,
it's just coconuts in general.
Yeah, if you could grow coconuts in Malaysia, which they did,
that's interesting.
Yeah, it was something with the husk or with the outside of the coconut, not the meat. Not the milk like we drink nowadays. Coconut milk, good for you.
Yeah.
No, fuck that. I mean, we drank it. The boy showed me how to open up a coconut, and that was lovely. Drank that real coconut milk, but no, the Brits needed it for the gunpowder. So Fiji, and they were still making money off of that in the day, but they also had a gold mine, and it was probably just one. But I mean, Fiji Islands are all volcanic islands, and that's where the gold comes up through. You know, when you got old volcanoes. So they also had some new volcanoes, but there's Vatukola. Vatukola was a gold mine. I went up there to visit once because some guys had talked about it. Some of the fellows who left over from the colonial days. Now I was there, got there in 1978. Fiji had only got their independence in 1970. They were only
wild.
8 years independent.
From
Britain, yeah.
Okay.
They more or less forced out. Off you go. We're getting rid of our colonies now. Right, you're on your own. I mean, it wasn't, again, like they came in, we sort of, please take us. I think they sort of, really? We got to go now? We sort of like it here. No, right, off you go. No. So they're still Commonwealth country where they have the head of state, they have the king, they have the president, they have the parliament and all that, but they still have a royal representative, which technically represents the queen. And if there's, a question that's constitutional, that guy might have the final say because he's representing the queen.
Interesting.
Yeah, so Commonwealth is like that. And they've had some problems with that. But anyway, that was like 8 years before I got there. So it was a very new independent country. And it turns out, genetically speaking, by the time I got there, as opposed to when they were independent, when they first became a colony, and it was only Fijians, that sugarcane thing, when the Fijians said, fuck you, I ain't doing that, boss. Well, they didn't have to worry about that because they had a whole subcontinent of India to get workers from.
So a lot of Indian immigrants.
They set up an indentured labor system, just like America was started with indentured labor. It wasn't free labor. It was indentured. Get their asses over here and then work for 7 years like a dog, and then you're free.
Yeah.
And that's how slavery started here, too. In English, there was no tradition of English slavery. That was Spain and France and those guys. English didn't have it in their law. So when the first black slaves were bought off the boats, either Dutch or Spanish boats at Jamestown, those blacks were indentured servants, just like the Irishmen or the poor whites they brought over. Exactly the same. It was 7 years, indentured servitude. You were entitled at the end of that 7 years, plot of land, maybe a suit of clothes, blah, blah. And they were responsible for your food and board while you were doing the work. Whatever they told you to do, that's what you did. But the black slaves, that first batch, the ones that lived, they got land and they got sent off just like the white fellas, and the new ones came in. Yeah. And it was like that in Jamestown for till, I don't know, from 1620 till about 16, I don't know, about 30 years or something. And one of the original black slaves, Mr. Johnson, he had his own plantation out in the bush, and he was getting people in to work for him, indentured servants, white and black. He had a black fellow who had finished his 7 years and said, Mr. Mr. Johnson, I'm due to get my suit of clothes and my land. He said, no, man, you belong to me.
Wow.
I said, why, Mr. Johnson? But you told me. He said, no, you belong to me until I say you don't. And he said, I don't think so. I hear tell that's not right.
It's like that slippery slope of just what.
And this guy, this indentured servant, this black indentured servant, took this black plantation owner to court. And the court mulled over and said, these are all landowners themselves running the courts. He said, he says he owns this guy until he doesn't. That would be really good for my plantation, too. Maybe no precedent in law, but... Oh, fuck that! You belong to him! So that's Mr. Johnson got to keep this dude. And that was a precedent set.
Were there multiple cases of that, or is that like a famous case?
That was supposed to be the first one in Virginia.
Wow,
that's
unbelievable.
Spread out. So
it all started from that.
Yeah, did not spread, funnily enough, to the white population. But even that damned Irishman, it wasn't worth a shit. Now they can let him go after 7 years. But now they brought in the black indentured. Well, in Fiji, all that was ancient history. And they made contracts with these Indian people and said, 7 years. They called the Gurmit. I think it was the Gurmit population. And they said, look, after 7 years, you can, or 5 years, I forget, it was different. But you'll have your room and board while you're there. You'll work for us. You'll get paid. And at the end of that time, if you want to come home with your money. You'll be a big man. You can buy your own land, marry the woman you want. Everything will be Jake. Said, yeah, boss, I'll sign on the dotted line. There's no hope back home maybe to get that. Well, of course, they're indentured labor. They get hauled over to Fiji. They're working like dogs in the fields. They're getting a place to stay. They're getting something to eat, to drink. But they're not getting paid much. And what they get paid goes to the company store. Just like in America. Coal miners. Thank you, Mr. Trump. Coal miners. Goes to the company store. You get paid in script. Oh, you get $10 in script that's only good at the company store.
Right.
So the boss is making your labor, and he's making your money back on that shit, too.
So when did this start?
This is the government labor. It was soon after the colony started, so 1870s.
Okay.
The government labor started bringing...
was it the parliament, or did they go to India to outsource this?
This is all the Brits. All the Brits stuff. Yeah, so Fijians had nothing to say about nothing anymore. But again, enlightened... colonialism, since it was late Victorian, they didn't just steal the land like they used to in the old days, like in America and Canada. They already developed a system of native trust land. Native trust land meant that since, and especially in Fiji, I presume, since I don't think it had anything to do with it, it was probably already an idea that they had, and it had used in other places. But being a communal society, it made sense. This land is entrusted to the group, to the tribe, to the king, to the Tui. It's belonged to the people. So you can't sell it.
Yeah.
Now, it's the same way it was in North America. They didn't give it a good goddamn. They just took it, they wrote the treaty and handed it off, and it wasn't good for anything after that,
Right.
But they wrote these things. This is the way it was. When you learn from our mistakes. And how much? 90? I think 90% of the land in Fiji was declared native trust land. Couldn't be sold or bought.
That's impressive.
Could not be bought or sold. Could be rented.
Okay.
And an imperial lease is 99 years. That's how they got Hong Kong. That was an imperial lease to the Chinese. They didn't buy Hong Kong even then. They had an imperial lease, 99 years. That's why they left in 97. Technically, that was the contract.
Jeez.
And it came to a time where I guess we got to honor the contract. And Hong Kong was probably not worth much to Britain anymore with China looming. So they left, trying to make a deal. There's still sort of a deal. So Fiji had their native trust land. The Indians, when they finished working, they couldn't get any land. There was no land to get. They could get, maybe they get an imperial lease, but those imperial leases for the white folk. They weren't for these Indian buggers. Get the hell home. We'll get some more of you.
Yeah.
Always more Indians. Always more Indians. We'll get some more of you. So they wanted to send them home, but they lost too much face. They were gone for 5 years, 7 years, whatever it was. no money in their kit now. They're going to get their way home. They're going to come home
with
totally
nothing.
disgraced with nothing.
Yeah.
They said, all this work. Oh, jeez. So most of them made a sensible decision. They were young. They knew this area now. They'd worked it. They knew what the work was like. They knew what the chances were. They knew what it was like back home. Said, well, we're going to stay, boss. We'll stay. We'll work on this like tenant farmers. So they got deals that were like tenant farming, like in the South. Where the slaves didn't leave, but they didn't have very good deals either. They were farming, doing the same job and getting a little bit out of it if they were lucky. So that's what the Gurmits, they stayed as tenant farmers. And then the Brits were responsible for bringing some women over so you could have your mail order brides or whatever. So being from the Indian subcontinent, there were enough women brought over that they, as I undelicately would phrase it, usually is they bred like rabbits. So the population of Fijians in Fiji probably hadn't moved a whole lot in 100 years. And when I was there, I think the total population was about 650,000 in the whole country. And the Indians had about half the population.
Wow.
Starting from zero in 1870.
That's crazy.
To 1978. Let's say 100 years. Because they did have the 100-year celebration when I was there. Yeah, they had the Gurmit celebration in 1979 probably. So it was 100 years. Had taken over half the population. Now, Fijians were not very happy about that. They could get along with these Indian fellows. The Indian fellows they could start shops. And all my club people were shop owners. They all owned shops, and they played tennis in their spare time. They were nice fellows, and I could get discounts at their shops and all that. They all had the same stuff, but, some had a little more jewelry, some had a little more sporting goods, some had a little more electronic goods, so I could mix and match. I try to spend money with all of them to be happy. But that's one thing they could do. Farming wasn't going to make them a lot of money, but doing that, they could. Yeah. And Fiji needed it. As the Fijians told me more than once, we're not very good at business. I said, what do you mean, mate? You could do what he does. You're as smart as him. Oh, yes, there's nothing to do with that. A Fijian fellow, he opened a business. I said, yeah. And he opened that first day. I said, yeah. I said, well, his cousin would come in and say, I need that. He said, oh, here, you have that. And another cousin would come in, I could use some of those. Oh, here, you must have this. And then his brother-in-law comes in and says, by the end of the day, there's nothing left in the shop. And he has not made $1, not $1. The Indians, they're a little sharper with the dollar. And it turns out a lot of the Indians who came were from the state of Gujarat. And I learned this as I was there longer. And the state of Gujarat in India, they call the natives of Gujarat as the Jews of India. So
interesting.
They were supposedly sharp with business even before they might have got fleeced a little bit on this deal with the British, but sharp enough once they said, this is what we're in for, that they made, lemonade out of the lemons, shall we say. Right. And so the head of Fiji was it was still Tui Thakambau, no, King Ratu Thakambau. Now, he was the paramount chief of Fiji, related to the original one when they sold themselves off. And when it came independence, and he was still the chief, the head, when I was there. And he was a very wise fellow. He was older, pretty old by then, but he had a phrase. He said, "Fiji is like a three-legged stool." I said, how is that, Chief? He says, well, like a three-legged stool. You have the Fijians. They own the land. Nothing happens without the land. We all belong to the land. That's good. We have the Indians. They know the business. We cannot have a country in modern day times without the business. And what's that third stool? The Europeans, the white people, they have the know-how. They know how to work in the world. So, like a three-legged stool, you take out one leg, stool collapses. So he's a very wise fella. He can see, maybe they don't like these Indian fellas here, but they're half the population, and they're doing something we can't do. And these white fellas, we're white, what they call European. European population was, percentage-wise, maybe 4%.
Okay.
So I've been a very acute minority in a country for a few years. Now, I was a very select minority. I was a very pampered minority, which is much different than most minorities. But that 4% was pretty important to the way the country ran. Because, again, it was only 8 years since independence. They knew, how things were greased, and they kept things going and maybe did have more connections with the outside world than the Indians or the Fijians could have or were interested in having, So they did. They worked together rather well until it didn't. But that's the way things ran. And the Tuies around the country all had their areas and like a duke, we would think in medieval times, took care of the areas and little noblesse oblige, gave out favors and jobs and took care of people, and they gave him fealty and offerings and whatnot. When I was there, I of course didn't know that. I learned this as I lived there. I lived there 2.5 years, but I knew just tiniest little bit of this. My Encyclopedia Britannica certainly didn't dwell in any of that. But when I was there maybe a month, I was so tired of seeing the resort, as pretty as it was, as nice as it was. So tired of seeing the resort that I'd saved up enough money and I got a rental car. It's a rental car. Oh, where am I going to go? Well, the capital's too far away, so I only had one day off. I had I worked 6 days a week. Now, you're in a beautiful place. It's gorgeous, lovely people, and a nice resort. But you only have one day off, and you're working.
Yeah.
Everyone else is on holiday, or they're working and they go home to their family and they do things, and they work 5 days a week like normal people. No, they're 6 days a week. I get Sunday off. Sunday off. And like most places, Sunday's not a really good day to have off. But there I was. I got my rental car for the weekend, and I said, well, can't go to the capital. I've only got one day. It's too far. The asphalt runs out after about an hour down the road. Oh, and there's only one road, only one real paved road since of that asphalt problem. But the paved road going in one direction, like going west, is called the King's Road. And then going east, the same road is called the Queen's Road. So I'd see these adverts for businesses that said, Stevie, this says your business is on the King's Road, but I thought that was called the Queen's Road. Oh no, Scotty, you just called the King's Road, going in the direction towards the resort. You see, I said, what? When you got one road, one main road, you gotta, you got kings and queens, you got to make them both happy. So I didn't want to go to capital, wouldn't get much done. So I decided to go north towards the gold mines, and there was another business town called Lautoka, not too far from where we were, but I hadn't even been there. I'd just seen it, didn't know much about it. But it was almost as big as Nandi. Nandi had the airport, had more commercial area, but Lautoka had something. So then I'll drive up to Lautoka, and maybe the road goes all the way to Ba. Maybe I'll make it to Ba. Sounds good. Never been there. I don't know much about it. Let's go. So I didn't have anyone else to go with. Just jumped in my little Toyota, and off I went. I got to Lautoka in like 45 minutes. There wasn't much in Lautoka. Again, it was Sunday. I looked around. I didn't have any place to go, especially. I don't think there was a tennis club there. So I just said, well, I looked around.
Huge letdown, right?
Huge letdown. Hey, tennis club, what is going on? I got my racket in my car. Come on. Nothing to do. And I didn't find any place to sit down, and it was early yet. So I said, well, I'll just drive up, keep driving. There's pretty scenery. I hadn't seen any of the island but my little section, which was pretty, done up European. So I just drove, and it was pretty nice ride. The mountains in Fiji are really sort of weird, being volcanic mountains. There are some good sized mountains, but when you're driving down the road, there'll be little like God went pooch right through the crust of the earth, and there's this little mound that looks like it should be a mountain off in the distance, but it's like 50 feet from the road, just bang! Like, I guess it was all
weird.
Volcanic stuff, and it was just
molded
poking up
over.
there. Yeah, and it's really sawtooth type of stuff that it just didn't seem to fit. I said, what the hell is all that? I knew about volcanism and that, but it's just a weird, otherworldly looking place with all the jungle and these sawtooth things poking up at a weird perspective. But that was all interesting. I finally got up to Bazinal, at the top of the island. It was a sugarcane town in the day, and they say it was probably made some money off of the gold mines too. But when I ran up there again, most things were closed. I didn't know any better. But there was a hotel that was open, Hotel Ba. That was a big old colonial, rambling building. And it had lights on. It had a couple cars around, and it was getting a bit peckish now. It was about noon. So I thought, it was afternoon, actually. I didn't get up that early. So, yeah, it was early afternoon. And I could hear, something in the background, like the radio was playing. We didn't have TV in Fiji. They decided they wouldn't have TV until all the islands could be electrified, which would be never. So they had a radio channel, and it was run on an FM, and it had two radio channels, actually, run by the government, and they would run Fijian language, English language, and Hindi. And unfortunately, it wouldn't be like 92.7 is the English channel all day. 92.7 was the English channel up till noon, and then it became the Fijian channel. And the English would still be there, but it would jump to 91.5. So
Interesting.
It was kind of...
Did it follow it?
I never sort of found out why, but it would jump around. And if you weren't careful, you'd be listening to some gibberish on the radio. Said, what the hell? I don't understand. Oh, it's changed to Hindi again. God damn it. There were too many other... Radio Russia you could get, which was their propaganda arm, actually came in better than the Voice of America. Yeah,
wow,
Radio
crazy.
Russia you could get back then. And it was much clearer signal than the Voice of America. Couldn't imagine why. South Pacific, we didn't care. So the up at Ba, the big hotel, open, I could hear sounds coming out. So I belly up to the bar and said, oh my good man, what's on offing here? And there were about 3 people in this big old colonial tap room, and had beer on draft. So I said, I'll have one of those, and had a little something to eat. Well, I'll have a sandwich. How about that? And there's a fellow sitting off in the corner here, and at the side of the bar, and he heard me order some food. He said, "You're an American." I said, "Well, yes, I am, and I imagine you are too by the sound of that voice." He said, "Well, yes, I am." He comes over. He says, "I'm Jim," whatever his name was. "I'm Jim. I'm from West Virginia." I said, "What the hell are you doing in Fiji, son?" I said, "Well, I teach school. I just graduated from University of West Virginia." "Well, no, I had 2 years though." I said, "Oh, okay. You're working for the Peace Corps."
Right.
Yes, I am. So 2 years of college, he's teaching at the local school, I think, English, mathematics, science, and something else. He's teaching like 4.
Everything,
yeah, they teach about 4 subjects at the local school. Old Jim from West Virginia with the 2 years of college education. So Jim and I start gabbing away about this and that. He's been in Fiji 6 months at least. I've been there a month. Maybe he was there a whole year. Usually you only have 2 years with Peace Corps. So he'd been there a little while.
Yeah.
And, it's wondering how much Fijian he knew. He said, because I didn't know hardly anything. And they'd say hello and goodbye. And I don't even think I learned any curse words yet. Yeah, I don't know. And that's usually the
Hadn't
first
gotten
thing.
to the good stuff.
Yeah, it's usually the first thing you learn, but I hadn't gotten that yet. Just a few basic stuff, little basic stuff. And I knew a little bit tradition, how to drink traditionally. They have this stuff called kava, which had become famous in America in the last few years. It's a powdered pepper root, and it's a traditional drink. You get the powder in like a cheesecloth, and you mix it with the water, and you just sort of you squeeze it and rub it and get it going, filtered through this cheesecloth, and the water just comes out. It looks like dirty Mississippi River water during their flood, and this is the traditional drink. I said, okay. And it's in a big big hand carved wooden bowl called a tanoa, and it's got 4 legs, not 3 legs, like the king's idea. It's got a 4-legged thing, and you have a little coconut shell, and you swish it around a little bit so it's well mixed, and you take that coconut shell, and there's somebody in charge. He's the one who's mixed it. He'll take the coconut shell, and you offer it to the prestigious person. I guess the most prestigious person in a certain direction, like to the left, maybe.
So it's like a communal thing?
Yes. And the boys would do it at the resort as a coffee break thing. They wouldn't have coffee. They go out and make kava. They make this kava. And so we'd be in charge of making it, and they'd all sit around in a circle, and the European guys, the engineer, and he'd come out too, and they'd all, they'd get the first offer, and then they offer it to you. You're supposed to clap, and then you take it, and I think they clap 3 times, and then you go, oh, take it down in one go.
Okay.
And no time to taste it, which is good because, again, it looks like Mississippi high flood water.
Tastes good or bad?
Yeah, muddy. Tastes muddy, yeah. But it's stuns your tongue.
Okay.
It's got a slight narcotic to it. And the tongue, after one, you could feel a little something going on there. I said, oh, well, it doesn't taste that good, but not horrible. I'll have another, but no, it's traditional. You have to hand it back, and he claps. You give it to him, clap, 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 and then he'll go to the next person in line, blah, blah, blah. So you'll get another, but everyone's got to get served.
First, yeah,
whether it's a king or the tui or you're the knave or the visiting dignitary, everyone gets their turn. You get your kava, but until it's done, and then maybe they'll make some more. Maybe they won't. It depends. But, yeah, by the second time, you knock it down and say, it's like when I had that.
Starting to hit
tooth in there. Got my tongue. It's getting a little
like Novocaine.
Little bit of Novocaine-y, and that's the first thing you notice, the Novocaine idea. But I found out later that it probably affects other things, being a mild narcotic of some sort. So we, I knew a little bit of that, just a little bit. I'd been there a month. I'd seen it going. I was an honored guest, so I learned the ritual and all that. It was important that I'd be included in that. And he knew about it. He'd been there a year. He'd been a teacher. He knew all that stuff. But we were drinking beer at the time, so none of that mattered. We just have another thank you. And yummy American tradition. So we had a beer, too, and we sat around talking about West Virginia and how bad the football team was and Penn State and how good they were and all this stuff. And it came, the sun got a little lower, and we were sitting there. We'd had a few of our beers and had something to eat. And in the next room, there was like a separate room off the big hall where we were, and we could hear commotion going on there off and on. There was a door, or maybe it wasn't a door, just a curtain or something between it. And we could see when people come in and out for more beer. There was a gathering out there. So we said, oh, something's going on. The boys are carrying on a Sunday. Looks good, but we were talking football. Well, it came to a point where we were about ready to leave, really, and somebody comes out from the back room, and he talks to my buddy Jim, and he talks in Fijian. I didn't understand what he said, and Jim turns to me and says, in that back room? I said, yeah, they've been carrying on back there. He said, well, yeah, that's the Tui is back there. I said, Tui of Ba from up here? This Tui? He said, yeah, he's back there with his fellows, and they're having a little bit of a party, and they see that we're out here, and they'd like us to join them. I said, oh, well, 3, 4, I don't know how many beers. He said, yeah, that's fine. Let's go join them. This is something I haven't done before. I can't buy anything. I can't do anything but drive my car up there, and found one place open. So I said, yeah, let's go join them. So we said, sure, let's go. So the fellow takes us off, and he comes into this room, and it's like the Last Supper. There's a fellow at the head of the table, big fella.
The Tui.
The Tui. It has to be the Tui, just from the looks of him. He's pretty round. Though muscular. He's not round. Oh, he's round, but ain't fat round.
Yeah.
He's like not as round as a sumo wrestler, not as much jiggly as that.
He's got that big build, though.
Oh, big build. He could knock a lot of people down at once, and a bald head, and he looked different because, and I don't know if I knew it then, because he was Tongan Fijian. He looked just a little different than the Fijians. A different kind of fierce, or a different thing in the face and the eyes, and color eyes, just a little different, you know. I'm more bronzy almost, I don't know, than milk chocolate, you know, just a little different. So you knew he was something else just from the size and the look of him. And we were introduced as visitors from America, and he spoke a little bit of English. He spoke some English, but being the Tui, he wouldn't speak a lot. You know, he had people speak for him. But he welcomed us and said, please have a seat. We're having a party. We'd like you to join us. And said, well, that's lovely, sir. We've had a few beers already. He said, oh, well, then you must have some more. So we all sat around the table, and most of the conversation was in Fijian. So I couldn't understand much of anything, and most of the boys that were around the table with us, they weren't, you know, they were from that area. I don't think they were that well educated, didn't know tons of English, but we'd have some little broken conversations, or this or that, and then Jim could gather a little bit of something from the fellow next to him, and he'd try to translate it to me and get a little idea. And it turns out that, you know, we asked Tui, you know, I don't know if we asked or the story came out that the Tui was, you know, traditional head of the area. And I'd met the Tui in Nandi, and he was a guy about that big around and about my size, and, you know, skinny as a rake, and was not a very impressive fellow.
Different Tui.
Yeah, but this Tui
different
was
kind of Tui.
Something else. So besides being different, you know, with the Tongan and Fijian blood, turns out that he had fought with the British, not during World War II. He wasn't that old, but he fought with the British in the British Army in the Malayan uprising. Now, I don't know if you know anything about that.
Nope.
There was an uprising in Malaya, which was a British colony, where Malaysia is now, in Singapore, in that area of Asia, Southeast Asia, not too far from Vietnam, no, but the British section of that little area near Siam, Thailand. Well, it turns out the Malaysian uprising was the only communist populist uprising that had been put down by European power in all of the history.
Yeah.
And the British did it because of two things. The Malays that were uprising were mostly Chinese, ethnically Chinese. Malay is in between India, China, Indochina, in that area. So it's all mixed, you know, mixed racially.
Okay.
It's a really polyglot. But almost all the uprisings were Chinese, ethnic Chinese, Chinese communists. They got fifth columnists in there, got them all riled up. And sure, there's plenty to get riled up about. But these insurgents were all ethnic Chinese, were clustered in Chinese villages and Chinese towns and stuff. So it wasn't like the other Southeast Asian or other uprisings where your uprising people revolting were pretty indistinguishable from the neighbors.
Yeah.
These guys were very obviously. The British carpet bombed villages and areas that were Chinese, ethnically Chinese, and that helped suppress, after quite a while, helped suppress the rebellion. Now, they did leave, and it became its own country. Malaysia and Singapore sort of broke off on their own. Singapore was just the capital, whatever, but they broke off as a city-state, and Malaysia is its own thing. But with considerably fewer Chinese population that the British helped decimate because they were the obvious guerrillas. Well, the Tui Mba had been a part of that. And the Tui Mba was probably not as big as he was now, but was, again, traditional, a large fellow and a warrior in his tradition. And with training by the British, he was part of a anti-insurgent group. And
wow.
British would train these boys, and maybe with a British advisor, a British officer, and maybe a sergeant major or something, they'd send them out in the bush for a month at a time or whatever. And these guys, from Fiji or Solomon Islands or wherever, they take care of themselves in the jungle. And they had basically carte blanche to kill every motherfucker that was Chinese that they could find, no
That's
question
wild.
to ask. So they come out. The Tui, as we found out later, Tui had a collection at the time of ears or fingers. I forget what it was. Now the translation eludes me. But he would come back from this long range thing with the group, and he had necklaces, and that was sort of a traditional thing. His warrior, his warrior ethic, and
that is wild.
He got to prove it in the Malaysian uprising. He was too young for World War II, but British made good use. So the Tui, besides being of the right family and he also got the rare distinction of trying to proving himself in battle and being of the right stuff, as it were. So we did get, I guess, some of this information as we were there drinking and eating little bits and pieces. And it occurred to me as I listened to some of the stories and looking at the Tui that he brought to mind a character that had been in the news not too long before for quite a few years. And it was another strong man from East Africa called Idi Amin. Idi Amin had been a sergeant in the British colonial army back in the day, and that was as high as you could go, was sergeant. But he had been trained, he was a good enough soldier, been trained as a paratrooper, been trained as special forces, been trained as this and that. He had like 4 or 5 different trainings, but he's still sergeant. But when the British left Uganda, that area of Africa, he ended up eventually becoming dictator of Uganda. And he had been in the news. I looked at this Tui, looked exactly like the Tui, the bald head, the broad thing, a bit of a braggadocio, though the Tui wasn't, I couldn't tell that much from his manner, but he just came out of him, He was a very upright fellow, and he's just telling the stories. You could tell the guys were all very enthralled with it.
Yeah.
But Tui and Idi Amin, one and the same. So after a little bit of quite a few beers and listening to stories and now recognizing it's fucking Idi Amin over there. Idi Amin, he's a dangerous fellow. We get asked, now that Tui was done with his carrying on at the hotel, it was getting dark, he would like us to grace his presence with a trip to his home, which is up in the country somewhere. He's a Tui, he's the head, he's the Duke, he's got to have a nice place. So we're looking at each other saying, I'm looking at him, do you know where his house is? He said, well, no, it's up in the bush somewhere. I said, and I've seen the Tui of Nandy's house. It's very nice. It was the nicest house around. It was up on stilts because we were sort of a floodplain, and it had caught the breezes, had a nice verandas around the outside. It was like a beach resort house in America, not middle class beach resort house. But everyone else was living in the villages, and if they're lucky, they had a few buildings that were cinder block, and most of them were not. They were fronds and bamboo. But I figure, well, Tui, you got a nice place. Oh, I don't know. It's getting late. Tui seems like a nice guy. But you know what he reminds me of? Who? Reminds me of Idi Amin. And the guy had been there long enough, but I think he knew who Idi Amin was. Yeah, Idi Amin. Oh, my God. He does. He looks exactly like Idi Amin. I said, oh, my. Okay. We can't go. This is not a good idea. The Fijians are cannibals, don't you? I said, what? He said, what? You heard the stories? They were cannibals. Not 100 years ago, they were eating people, and they were eating missionaries. Hey, you're a missionary. I said, I just teach tennis, but you're like a missionary, and you're bigger than me. They might cast their eyes on you. I saw this guy's looking at you across the table.
Looking like a snack.
Yeah, I said, I said, you're crazy. I said, I don't know. You got Idi Amin, and he has a tradition of eating Europeans. So, okay, I'll try to make our apologies. And so with his broken Fijian, he tried to tell him, and the Tui would have nothing of it. No, you come.
The Tui gets what the Tui wants.
Tui gets. He wanted these white boys up to see his place. So I have a car, and Bill doesn't, and they took Bill in one car, and I got I got one of the retainers in my car for directions. Now, there weren't too many directions to be had because we already mentioned how many roads there are in Fiji. You had to go down the paved road about a half a mile, turn left on the gravel road that was going up the hillside, and keep going till you come to the Tui's house. So,
wow, all the way up the hill.
Yeah, up the hill. Well, there was only one house. You got to the top of the hill. There was an open area. It was a nice little cinder block house. It wasn't as impressive, really, as the Tui Nandi's, but it was had a beautiful view of the countryside of his land out below him. He was up on the hill. And it was at night, but you could see it would be, I don't know if you could see the water from there. Probably could. Wasn't that far. No place is that far from the water in Fiji. So it had a beautiful vista over his land, the Tui's land. But when we got there, we said, well, damn, it's just one place out in the middle of nowhere. Okay, Bill, what's up now? I said, we're going to drink kava. I said, okay. Now, I've never had kava and beer together, but I heard stories that is probably not the best combination. Though, like wine after beer, beer after wine, there is some combination that's better than the other, and I don't know whether you should have beer first or you should have kava first. I didn't know that much about it, but I knew there was some combination that was probably not good. And what is okay? And I didn't know where I was standing on that line, but anyway, it was kava time, so they brought out a big mat. We had a big old mat. They brought out the Tanoa. Excuse me. They brought out the good stuff from the Tui, the good kava, whatever it was, Yangona root, the top dollar stuff because he's the Tui. And they started making up we were talking about this or that, and the more I look at the Tui, the more I look like Idi Amin. And Idi Amin, he's just got, Tui collected earlobes and fingers. Idi Amin, he just kills people for fun. Fijians used to be cannibals.
Start piecing this all together in your head.
Put it together in my addled head with the beer. This is without the kava. So they mixed it. We being the honored guest. Tui gets the first dash. We do our clapping. And then comes back and it's Bill or me. You get the first one. Take it. Gobble it down. Pass it on. Still tasted like muddy water, but maybe a little bit better than the stuff I had, common man kava. So we go around, and again, can't copy the conversations too well, but Bill was just translating little dribs and drabs. We weren't learning anything new, except that it was time to eat something, and the Tuis thought that I'm going to get the wife to make some food. I said, okay, doesn't look like there's electricity up there. I'm wondering now, what can the wives make that's... Could be us. Oh, my God. Could be us. What are they going to do?
The sudden realization.
Yes, could be. There could be a Lovo pit, which is a pit dug in the ground where they would put the pig and cover it up, or the people, and with the rocks, and they'd build a fire.
Oh, my God.
Yes, it could have been one right up on the other side of the house. I don't know. Golly, I can't see it from here, but, it should be up there.
So it's just you and this other white guy, and you're out in the middle of nowhere.
8 of the retainers with the Tui. Yep.
Okay, wow.
8 of the retainers, me and West Virginia here. And so, us little white boys are sticking out like sore thumbs. So the Tui come, we'll go, talk. We go up to the wife, up to the house, and big room. It's got a table in the room, it's a low-down table with I guess we had pillows and stuff around. It wasn't like an American with the big high-up table. It was low down, and it wasn't a whole lot of stuff in there. Not like the Tui was a collector of anything, I guess. It was a pleasant enough room, much cleaner than my house is. And woman comes out, looks like she appropriately Mrs. Tui, age-wise, and they say something back and forth, and I don't know, in my addled head, she might have given him a little side eye, but didn't give him no talk back that I could tell, right? And she disappears out the back, and she pulls the curtain. There's I could see about 4 or 5 other women back there, women folk back there. I said, oh my God, what's back there in the kitchen? Is that daughters? Is that wives?
Is that a harem?
I don't know if they can have that. Can they have that? I knew just enough about Fijian culture at that time to get in trouble with my mind now, with the beer and the kava. And my mind's going because now I have a depressant, my beer depressant, and I have my stimulant, my kava. So the brain's going ding, 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 firing off little different ideas, bouncing off the inside of my head. I just was very confused. My head is spinning. I'm lucky I didn't throw up right there, which has been known to happen in odd cultural situations, but I did not projectile vomit at any time. I'll have you know ahead of time. Spoilers. I didn't get any spinnies, but it was very confusing about what was going on. So Tui said, "Okay, we eat," but we went back for more kava because they had to do leftovers. It was basically, like they would here back in the old days. The big meal was probably breakfast,
right?
And then you ate leftovers for lunch and dinner. Yeah. So they were okay. Looks like we won't have anything left. Let's do the leftovers for these bums, So the girls, however many they were, or who they were, in the kitchen trying to fix something up. We go back for another couple rounds of kava. The boys have made more Mississippi mud water. So God knows how many, I lost track of how many rounds we had, but probably as many rounds as we had beer, which was too many. And then we get called back, come time, we go. So us and all the retainers, we go up to the house, we all sit down, and it's stuff that I hadn't really had before. I've been staying in a hotel with European food. The other white guys that were working in the hotel was a Dutch chef. The sous chef, pastry chef was Dutch too. White boys. There was the manager was white, Australian. The assistant manager was one of the only other Americans around. There was an engineer. There was there may be 3 or 4 more. We had maybe 11 Europeans over a big hotel, and they were all managers. So 11 Europeans, and that's counting me.
Right.
And I didn't have anyone except Robin, who's also European, with me. I eventually got a Fijian kid who was a good player, and I made better. But so they were managing, between the 10 of them, maybe 1,000 people. You know, it was waiters and waitresses and maintenance and everything. So that's a big deal. So there's little me who's managing one other European person, and my West Virginia boy who's teaching 4 or 5 subjects he doesn't know anything about, and the Tui who could be a cannibal and has at least chopped off fingers and ears from Chinese rebels. Oh my God, in Malaysia, what's going to happen? So we're eating this food I'd never seen before, but it wasn't obnoxious and it wasn't.
Was it meat
too
or
spicy?
what was it?
I have no idea. I don't know. I've had. I'm thinking it's a tapioca, which is not, a sweet tapioca like we have, but the starch tapioca we would have there, and I'd had it since, but I think we had the tapioca. We did have some meat, pork probably, which I didn't think of. It probably wasn't refrigerated, but at least it was cooked rather early. Oh, did I mention that the Fijian translation for pork, since that's not native to Fiji, was brought in by the sailors? But they had pork early on, since there were always sailors there. The translation for people meat is long pig.
Oh, jeez.
So when you're talking about
that's a guy who eating some pork.
Yeah, it could, as far as I know.
Wow.
Maybe it doesn't taste like chicken. Maybe it's called long pig because we taste like pork. I don't know, but it did probably ricochet through my mind with all the things I had going on there. And knowing a little bit about a culture is sometimes worse than knowing nothing at all.
Yeah,
So,
your brain just keeps wandering. You have no idea.
And I was young enough to have a vivid imagination. I probably wouldn't venture so far nowadays as I did back then. But hey, this is an adventure anyhow. So anything could be happening in my brain just like it was happening here in front of me. So we all gobbled up our stuff after a hard day of beer drinking in Yakona. We had a bit of an appetite, and we gobbled it all up. Girls, of course, cleared the things, and I saw there was about 6 different women and of indeterminate age because I hadn't been there long enough to figure out, but none of them were children.
Right.
They were all somewhere in the range of teen to who I thought was the missus, who was 30, 40, I guess, and 40-ish maybe. But, they have very good genetics up there, not a lot of wrinkles and whatnot. So I couldn't tell. So things getting cleared up. What else? We're going to go back and drink some more kava now. Done with the food? Let's have a little dessert
Round
kava.
3. Yeah,
so we're back for some more clapping and drinking. And when we get done with that, I guess we get a signal or something, or the Tui sends one of the boys off and said, all right, everything's cleaned up. And from what we gather, the Tui tells the retainers, all right, night's done. Good night, boys. Well done job. Let's go. So I said, you come with us. They tell us, or Bill determines, he says, the Tui wants us to come up. I said, oh, okay, well, just saying good night to the ladies. That sounds fine. They made us a fine meal. It was a fine meal. Let's go say goodbye to the ladies.
How are your wits at this point? Are you just like, is your head just spinning? Or you?
It's sort of with that weird combination of beer and
the kava.
Maybe I hit the right groove on it where I was not thinking, say, perfectly. It was not muddled brain. It was probably just slowed down with weird things going on brain. So it was different. It was abnormal brain.
Right.
It wasn't regular, but
abnormal.
Not bad. It's like if I had been drinking beer that long, I would have been really stupid and very slurry. I didn't even speak that badly that I know of, but I didn't have much to say. See, I didn't speak Fijian.
Right.
But I think my diction was perfectly clear at the time.
So he summons you up where?
We summoned back to the house. And now the the dining room and the kitchen were empty of people. And the next room to the right pulled the curtain or went through the drapes, whatever the hell we did. And there was a room full of the fairer sex. Now, it was dark. There's no electricity. There's lamps and not a lot. So there wasn't a whole lot of light. But I could see this room, and I knew enough about a communal society to know that this was like sort of a longhouse bedroom, everyone together. Now, everyone together means, well, there were no brothers that I saw. Some of these retainers were brothers. They were all daughters or wives.
Yeah.
Maybe they were sister wives. We didn't have that phrase back then, but we didn't know. And my expert buddy here, Bill from West Virginia, could not elucidate me on the situation culturally or of a sharp opinion either way. So here is a whole room full of ladies of various ages, but all quite attractive, certainly after the kava. And
are they just hanging out, or like are they?
They are not naked. Fijians are not too crazy. They are in bed, however, and they have some kind, either the covers are up. The vision I have now is not seeing tons of flesh, but covered, though behind very thin covering, shall we say.
Go.
Yes, that shall we say. And the Tui is saying something to us, and Mr. West Virginia is I guess his brain, being younger than me, his brain is probably more addled, which I had no consideration whatsoever at that time, since he was my only link to reality, speaking a tiniest bit of Fijian, as opposed to me, who could say hello and goodbye. But what is he saying? Well, he would like us to stay, and either he would like us to pick one of the ladies to stay with, or he's offering all the ladies to us. I said, Bill,
What?
which one is it? Which one is it? Is it all the ladies? Is it something? Are they daughters? Are they wives? What are they? I can't exactly tell that from the phrase.
Oh,
They said,
man.
you don't know if they're daughters or wives. What are we supposed to do? We weren't eating just now. This is a big plus. We got through kava. We got through dinner. We weren't the main course. This is very good. There was no lovo in the back for us. But now you're telling me there are a room full of ladies and one tui and us two, and you don't know what the situation
What
is.
are we supposed to do here?
This is a diplomatic disaster waiting to happen if we make a wrong choice. Now, logically, of course you say, well, thank you, but no thank you. And that's what I was hoping to get across. Thank you, but no thank you. But certainly that could be considered a definite faux pas in many cultures as well. And diving right in head first, probably not the most agreeable of the choices, though certainly at that time and age, that would be my first choice, probably, to dive. It was not at that time, with the two variables here of the alcohol and the kava. It was not primary, however, in my mind. My primary in my mind was, how the hell do we get out of here? Right?
Survive.
Not make a bad mistake and the boys come back and chop us up for long pig. All right? I don't know how we do this. Bill, you got to help me here. I said, well, I don't really know. I said, can we ask? I said, well, that wouldn't be quite the thing. I said, Bill, what are we going to do? All right, look. I have one day off a week. I rented a car. I came up here, ran into you. I don't know you, but you're a good American boy, so we're going to say this. He understands Western culture. He worked for the British. Yes, he did. Okay. He understands the concept of work and how Europeans are sort of hung up on this concept, does he? Well, I assume so, yes. He was working for the British. Oh, yes, at a trade that we're not too sure about what it was, do we? All right. But he understands this. Now tell him, I work in Nandi, which is a considerable distance now, 2 hours on a decent road, and I have to work tomorrow morning. It is now by my watch, I'm thinking about 10:30 at night. I have to get back to Nandi. I will drop off at the hotel, but I have to get back to Nandi. As much as I'll enjoy a romp with the sister wives or whoever they are, this is a very lovely offer. If it is an offer, I need to go back to work. They will be sending the Marines out after me. All they know is I rented a car and came up north somewhere looking for adventure. And if I don't show up tomorrow, the Marines will be here. Tell him that. So Bill somehow conveyed the situation, and I guess he knew enough Fijian, or perhaps the Tui could tell by my agitated display that I was serious, that I had to go. And that as lovely as it would be to dive in head first to the pulchritude, the Fijian pulchritude, of which we did know nothing about, who they were, it probably wasn't the best diplomatic solution at this time.
Yeah.
So somehow Bill did a good enough job. The Tui did not get disappointed enough to have us for dinner, and we did almost like a Hope and Crosby, with a salam out, backing our way out.
Right.
I felt very much like the road to Morocco or something. Off on the road to Mbaha. And we sort of salamed our way out. and dashed to the automobile.
Wow.
And no one chased us with spears or anything. So I guess Bill had, unless the Tui was just winding us up, which could have been the case. We don't know to this day. We managed to get in the car, and there was only one way down the hill. Came to this asphalt road, went to the hotel where Bill had his car or whatever, or he lived right near there. And I adjourned on the 2-hour, hour-and-a-half trip back down to Nandi. Now, escaping all that, I was marveling at the lovely Fijian sky. I think I had a sunroof in the car. And as I was driving down, I forget, it was the Queens or the Kings Highway going south. So I was driving down the highway, looking at the Milky Way and the Southern Cross up there in the sky. There was suddenly a very sharp boom! And driving in Fiji, which is driving on the wrong side of the road for us Americans, it had come to pass that in my addled state, that perhaps I had watched the sky a little too long, and my car had bumped up against the curb, and thankfully it was small enough that it didn't jump over the curb. But I was coming upon a traffic circle, the only traffic circle perhaps in the whole entire part of that country, and if I wouldn't have been bumping up against a curb, I might have gone headlong into the cement abutment of the traffic circle.
Wow.
And ruined the car and myself. God knows if I had a seatbelt on at that time. But having kava and beer, perhaps I would have flown right through the windscreen and not been damaged at all. Who can tell? And then the Tui Mba could have had a roadkill version of a fine meal. Yes. So they didn't get me that time. Tui didn't have me. Unfortunately, I didn't have the Fijian nymphs, whoever they were. And I never had another offer like that in my life. So I got what I deserved, I guess. No good deed goes unpunished.
That
Huzzah.
is so wild.
It's certainly more than you bargained for, but a different version of it.
Right.
Less cannibal, more carn. What is it? What is the English word for sexual cravings as opposed to car? Yes, I can't remember, but we managed not to get in any trouble either way.
I'm glad you're alive, Uncle Scott. That's
long pig. I am very pig-like, but not very long. So I would have been a fine meal. Oh, Lordy.
Well, thanks for sharing the story.
Well, you're welcome. And that was in the day before you was born, young fellow. Huzzah.
It was wonderful.
Before the 80s. The days of stagflation, people, and Jimmy Carter. Ah, the good old days before Ronald Reagan. Here we go. Well, there you go again, Nathan.
Every time. All right, let's get out of here, Uncle Scott. Thanks so much again for sharing the story.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I'm sorry.
We'll have to do it again. We'll have to hit some other good stuff. I know you have plenty in the books. So.
Oh, I don't know. That's the biggest one. You don't get in cannibalism and international incident and a sexual escapade all in one story, young man.
You don't. We need to make a movie about this.
Yes. I think that Hope and Crosby would be their best bet right there.
Right there.
Oh, good Lord.
That's it. All right. Peace out.
Adios, peoples. Live long and prosper.